This page right then, it's the front cover of N64 Magazine from July 99. Big news at the top. Exposed! Nintendo's new console! Everyone was wondering what they were cooking up back then. Probably all the rumors about the Dolphin, what became the GameCube eventually. And Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark slapped right across the middle. Better than GoldenEye! They're shouting, big claim that. Everyone was hyped for Perfect Dark, weren't they? RES Evil 2 inches is apparently bigger than Zelda! A bold statement. Wonder if that was actually true. There's Armorines. Bug-blasting brilliance. Seemed alright at the time. Quake A 2 inches for multiplayer magic. Yeah, Quake on the 64. Good times. Jet Force Gemini. More secrets revealed. Rare were on fire back then, weren't they? And Star Wars Episode 1. Racer reviewed. Well, Episode 1 was a bit dodgy, but the pod racing game was actually decent fun. Donkey Kong. Stunning banjo beater. Another dig at banjo, haha, typical. And at the bottom, Planet Game Boy. Still going strong, those Game Boys, eh? Yeah, pretty standard issue for the time, lots of shouting and promises. This page is the welcome to issue 30 of N64 Magazine, dated July 1999. They are proudly proclaiming themselves as the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo magazine, going on about getting all their news first-hand from around the world and not just nicking it off the internet. The big feature is trailed as A Walk in the Dark, which is about Perfect Dark, and they are already hyping it as being even better than GoldenEye, remember all that? They've got a load of other games covered in this issue too, like Donkey Kong 64, and Resident Evil 2 coming to the N64, which was a big deal at the time, on a massive 512 megabit cartridge, they say. Plus there's a review of Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, and they haven't forgotten the Game Boy either. Looks like a pretty packed issue for any N64 fan back then. They also name-drop Jet Force Gemini, Quake 2, and Armorines as being featured. This page is the contents page of the mag, yeah. Issue 30, July 99, it says up top. So first up we have Planet 64 inches, which is the Nintendo 64 news bit, kicking off on page 12, and they're talking about Project Dolphin being unveiled, which is what we now know as the GameCube. That's ages before it came out then, eh? And Nintendo toys, apparently. There's a picture of Mario karting with Bowser, so probably Mario Party stuff in there too. Donkey. Then it's coming soon on page 18, promising a mega E3 preview section, showing screenshots for Resident Evil 2, which was already out on PlayStation but coming to the 64, a screenshot from Armorines, which was Acclaim's Bug Blaster, and World Driver Championship trying to be Gran Turismo on the N64 by the looks of it. N64 Arena starts on page 56, that's the review section, sponsored by Gameplay, remember them? They've got Star Wars Episode 1, Racer featured, LucasArts doing their thing again, promising a tremendous Wipeout beater. Bold claim that. Charlie Blast's Territory, on page 64, sounds like a puzzle game, starring a fat workman in jeans apparently, that's descriptive. Import Arena, page 68, for all the Japanese and American games. They've got Super Bowling, claiming it's much better than Milo's Astro Lanes, strong words, and Bottom of the Ninth, another Yankee baseball game, sound of distant snoring they reckon, bit harsh. Then Game Boy Planet, on page 35, the dedicated Game Boy section, best and only dedicated Game Boy magazine in the world, they're saying, bit of self-promotion there, and regulars at the bottom with Information Station, N64 Shopper, N64 Magazine issue 31 preview, and What If, right, that's about the size of it. This page from N64 Magazine back in July 99 is taking a good look at what's coming up for the Big N. It's all about the future look at new N64 games. Looks like Quake 2 is getting some coverage, described as all new shots, and an absolutely superb multiplayer game. Bit strong that for Quake 2 on the 64, wasn't it a bit of a graphical downgrade? Jet Force Gemini is also featured as Rare's Space Blaster, and they reckon it's gonna be brilliant. Rare were on a roll then, so fair enough to be excited. Then there's 40 Winks, labelled as a dreamy platformer. They seemed pretty keen on that. Can't really remember much about it now though. Of course, Perfect Dark is hogging a massive chunk of the page, calling it a special investigation, and the biggest game of 1999. Bit of hype there, but everyone was buzzing for that after GoldenEye. Donkey Kong 64 also gets a shout out with brand new picks. Those were the big hitters everyone was waiting for. Elsewhere in the contents there's the usual mailbox, a how-to for Duke Nukem, 0 Hour, and something about Clobber 5 N64 classics, probably GoldenEye mentioned in there for sure. There's also bits and bobs like Help Wanted for Zelda, Tips Extra, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, Hotline Tips, Game On for challenges, Compo Results, I'm the Best typical magazine fodder. Rounding it off are regular sections like Skill Club 64, Contacts, Directory, and subscriptions and back issues. Oh, and a multiplayer compo and letter from America section. So yeah, standard magfare really, but all about those future games back then. This page is a look at some upcoming games for the N64, back when we were all buzzing about what was next for Nintendo's grey box. Looks like Quake 2 is getting a run out, and they're really pushing the boat out on the violence. Violence is golden, the big headline screams. There's some screenshots of the game, a bit brown and blocky like you'd expect, showing off the super shotgun which they reckon is very satisfying and effective, and some chaps called enforcers lining up to cause trouble. They're even pointing out to shoot an enemy in the head, helpful stuff. And of course the machine gun, with its great kickback. It's Quake, innit? Just more GIBS on the N64, andal. Then there's Jet Force Gemini, they reckon it's brilliant and have some gorgeous new pics. Sounds like they're quite impressed. And you can't blame them, Jet Force Gemini did look pretty snazzy back then. Finally, 40 Winks, described as a 3D platformer, GT Interactive, are apparently springing it on us as a surprise. They think it looks ace, which is good for them. Platformers were 10 a penny back then, so it had to stand out. There's a little info burst bit for Quake 2, says it's from Activision, 128 megabit cart size, up to 4 players, needs the memory pack, expansion pack and rumble pack, but not the Game Boy pack. Coming out in July in the US and UK, but typical Japan is TBA. They're pretty keen on it in the anticipation stakes, giving it 4 out of 5 red blobs. So yeah, looks like Quake 2 is the big thing they're pushing this month, alongside Jet Force Gemini, and a platformer called 40 Winks. Standard N64 magfare really. This page is about Quake 2 on the N64, a proper blast from the past there. It's a review, looks like they were pretty impressed with it. They reckon it's not just a lazy port from the PC, but a proper N64 version, which is good to hear. Apparently the levels are designed by Raster Productions, who gave it a nicer color scheme than the PC version, less of the browns and greys. They seem well chuffed with the multiplayer, saying it's absolutely superb and one of the best they've ever played. Bit strong maybe, but we'll see. Lesser version. There's a bit about the controls, saying they've nailed the analog stick and got rid of the crosshair inertia from Turok 2, which was a pain. They've cut down on detail and enemy animations to keep it running smooth, which makes sense on the N64. Apparently they've managed to get it running at blinding speeds, almost no slowdown, which is a bonus. They mention the BFG in one of the captions, saying it's in the top left picture, but they can't tell you what BFG stands for. Cheeky. Also, the multiplayer levels are massive, lots of places to snipe, which sounds fun. They reckon the railgun is brutal, and other weapons include a rocket launcher, 2 machine guns, the chain gun like in Turok, the hyperblaster, and grenades. A good arsenal then. They mention it's straight blast the monsters mentality, perfect for the adrenaline multiplayer. Right at the end it mentions GoldenEye, and Turok 2, and the upcoming Jet Force Gemini and Perfect Dark, saying Quake 2 is a top addition to the N64's multiplayer masterclass. High praise indeed. Activision promised a review of the game next month, so they must have liked it. Good times, simpler times. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Jet Force Gemini, Rare's new shooter. It's got all these all-new shots of the game, which, to be fair, do look quite nice. There's that dog character, Lupus they're calling him, who's like Lassie with massive guns, apparently. Sort of. Seems a bit silly, but hey, it's Rare. They're showing off bosses, some goo on the walls, the kind of thing they reckon we like, bit violent, innit? Then there's Lupus, turning into a boat, which is a bit random, and some cute little fellas you have to save. They're even raving about the reflections on the floor, showing off a bit there. The infoburst box gives you the nerdy details, 256 megabit cart size, rumble pack, yeah, expansion pack maybe, and it's meant to be out in August in the US, but typical, still TBA for us in Japan. 5 red blobs for anticipation rating, so they're clearly pretty keen. Looks alright, Jet Force Gemini, could be a laugh. This page of N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Jet Force Gemini, which was a bit of a looker back in the day, wasn't it? Seems like the reviewer, this Jess fella, came back from E3 proper chuffed with what he'd seen, and reckons it's going to be something special, comparing it to a turbocharged version of Body Harvest. Blimey Tay. They're saying the controls are similar to GoldenEye and Turok, which was the standard really for shooters on the N64 at the time. Analog stick for moving, C buttons for strafing, classic stuff. Apparently you can jump as well, groundbreaking. Yee! Visually, they reckon Jet Force Gemini looks a bit cutesy at first glance, but underneath it all, it's a game about wanton carnage. Bit dramatic innit? They talk about firing with Z, reloading with B, and scrolling through weapons using the C buttons, standard N64 fare. Nothing too wild there. Apparently the weapons are something else, causing insectoid aliens to explode in a storm of green goo. Nice. They even mention a Ghostbusters-style plasma gun and a razor-wind frisbee that decapitates enemies. Sounds a bit over the top, even for then, but hey, it's a video game. There's a little picture of Vela, in her exosuit, looking like she's about to go into some spooky lair. Another screenshot shows some action with aliens working together to try and kill you, the swines, as the caption puts it. Bit harsh. Then there's another picture showing a big insectoid boss, and the caption says it'll take a lot of firepower to take him down. No kidding, looks massive. Apparently, there are 120 levels in Jet Force Gemini. 120! That is a lot, even for back then. They mention you play as Juno, Vela, and their dog Lupus, and each has their own levels, all meeting up for a final battle against this evil Mizzer chap. You get exosuits and vehicles that turn from boats to cars. Sounds like they're throwing everything at this one. They go on about how graphically stunning it all is, fast and fluid, with special effects and lighting, and loads of impressive cutscenes with spaceships. Proper icing on the cake apparently. They seem quite excited, saying it's going to be a thing of greatness. A bit much perhaps, but they were hyped for it, weren't they? They say we can't wait until the end of August when it's meant to come out, and they'll have another playtest in the next issue. How's that? Very dramatic ending there. This page is all about 40 Winks, billed as a platformer that reckons it could be better than Banjo-Kazooie, which is a bold claim back then, especially as Banjo is pretty much king of the hill. It's a future look, so we're getting an early peek. There's an info burst box that gives you the lowdown. It's from GT, cartridge size is 128 megabits, and it's a one-player game. Memory pack and rumble pack are a yes, expansion and GB pack are a no. Release dates are listed as Winter 99 for the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 3 red tomatoes and 2 yellow ones, so they are reasonably excited about it I suppose, not exactly groundbreaking levels of hype though. Looking at the screenshots you can see the main character Ruff, apparently in different costumes, which are touted as extra. They mention swinging scythes as being very painful, which isn't exactly selling it, is it? Another screenshot shows Tumble, at the mercy of some green beasts, and they say the backgrounds are simply lovely. A bit understated if you ask me. Overall it looks alright, a bit kiddie maybe. We'll have to wait and see if it can really challenge Banjo's crown though. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at a game called 40 Winks. Apparently before now it was just a rumour, but now they've seen it and reckon it's a good looking game on the N64, graphically impressive and all that. It's made by Eurocom, who did Duke Nukem, 0 Hour, remember that one? The game is about these two kids, Ruff and Tumble, and you collect winks in the dream world. Something about good dreams and nightmares. Looking at the screenshots you can see some skeleton bashing action, a bit of jetpack flying, vine climbing like in Zelda, and some rope swinging. One bit looks like you are stranded on a beach, and there's a beached pirate ship. There's also talk of character transformations. They say it's like Zelda's Hyrule Field with a hub system, and you can go into different rooms in a house to get to game levels. The camera was a bit fiddly apparently, but otherwise it plays well and looks good, especially the character animations. They think it's got a fairy tale vibe, but might be good, comparing it to the best games on the Ninty. Gameplay-wise it sounds like you can jump, roll, and get more moves as you go on. Ruff can chuck lightning and they both can turn into other characters, even a robot. They mention Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and even Lair in Banjo as comparisons, which is a bit much maybe. Sounds like they are trying to see if it can compete with games like Banjo, Gex and Space Circus, saying it's looking promising but they will have to wait and see. They reckon 40 Winks is head and shoulders above Gex and Space Circus anyway, which isn't saying much really. They'll be covering it more in future issues. This page from the magazine is all about the upcoming Nintendo console, codenamed Project Dolphin, which is supposed to be a PlayStation 2 beta, or so they say. It's all very exciting, if you believe the hype. Apparently Nintendo unveiled the details at E3 before the main event even started. Bit cheeky that. They're banging on about how it's going to be released around the same time as the PlayStation 2 at the end of 2000, and how it's going to use DVD technology, just like Sony's machine. They're even teaming up with Panasonic and IBM to make it the most advanced console ever. Quite a claim. It's using some fancy 18-micron chip apparently, which is meant to be proper fast. Pen A. The article mentions concerns about piracy, and how Nintendo is developing some super advanced anti-piracy stuff for Dolphin. Good luck with that, eh? They always say that. The big question is whether they can actually get enough games ready for launch. They seem confident, mentioning Rare and Left Field are on board, and some Aussie mob called Retro Studios. Towards the bottom, it mentions that despite all the Dolphin buzz, Nintendo are still pushing the N64 as their main priority for now, at least until the end of next year. Games like Perfect Dark, Donkey Kong 64, Jet Force Gemini and Resident Evil 2 are still on the horizon for the N64. So don't throw away your 64 just yet. Warren6, there's a picture of Mario on there, looking all enthusiastic, and a DVD disc, just to hammer home the DVD point. Typical magazine stuff really, building up the excitement for the next big thing. We'll see if it lives up to the hype, won't we? This page is a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it? Right at the top in shortcuts they're banging on about Zelda winning some Game of the Year gongs. Yeah, fair enough, it was alright. And apparently Miyamoto was there, looking dapper in a jacket. Go figure. Then there's something about Disney and Nintendo doing Mickey Mouse games. For the N64 and Game Boy, a racing game first apparently, followed by some Banjo-Kazooie type thing maybe. Sounds a bit kiddie if you ask me, but hey, gotta appeal to everyone I suppose. Below that, and again in English, they're trying to explain the Dolphin, which we now know was the GameCube processor. Copper processors are the big thing apparently, faster than aluminium. Makes sense I guess. And it's going to have DVD tech, which is proper huge for games. Loads more space than those N64 cartridges. And even movies. They're saying 400 MHz clock speed, which is apparently faster than the PlayStation 2, blimey. Then we've got some cheat codes for GoldenEye, for action replay users. New multiplayer levels Cradle and Statue. Cradle is for sniping, Statue for a 4-player deathmatch apparently. Probably a bit glitchy knowing these things back then, but always fun to mess about with. Users. Lastly, there's the N64 Diary, keeping us in the loop for June and July 99. Episode 1. Racer game for the N64 is out, and Duke Nukem 0 Hour has landed. And for the handheld fans, there's a new Mario game on the Game Boy, Mario DX. Looks like there were a couple of competitions running in issue 29, one for Mini Monaco Grand Prix, and another called I'm Exhausted Compo, whatever that is. And someone called Martin is having a birthday in July, he's 27, ancient? Finally they're teasing the next issue, issue 31, coming out in July on the 12th. Right then, onwards. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 30 it looks like, is having a bit of a chat about Perfect Dark. They're saying just like we said, because they were asking readers what they wanted to see in the game a few issues back, and apparently Rare listened. They've got a list of things that might be in there like 64 to GB pack compatibility, jumping, a creator-player mode, deathmatch bots, the kind of stuff we were all buzzing about back then. There's even mention of body heat and Predator-style weaponry. Sounded pretty cool at the time. Then there's a little bit about Acclaim, something called Acclaim Nation. Seems they were shuffling their studio names around. Places like Iguana US and Iguana UK were becoming Acclaim Studios Austin and Salt Lake City. All a bit corporate really. On the right, there's the N64 quiz, always a good little filler. £50 to be won. Questions are all about N64 stuff, Perfect Dark again, Donkey Kong 64, a sports game called Bottom of the Ninth, 40 Winks, Pokemon Pinball, and even a Star Wars racer question thrown in. Question about Anakin Skywalker too, bit random. Seems simple enough, just send your answers in with a pence. Every penny counts, eh? And yeah, they've got a little throwback to their future Perfect feature, reminding you they were on the ball with all the Perfect Dark news. Good times, simpler times. This page of the mag is all about the latest gear and gadgets, proper toys for us gamers back in the day. Kicking off with motorized Mario Karts, blimey. They were trying to flog these things at £6 each from Toys R Us. Apparently the Yanks had all the best stuff, and these were meant to be hours of fun, bombing around your desk at work or wherever. They came with Mario, Yoshi, and even Bowser. Then there's football binoculars, free from E3, which was a big gaming show if you remember. The reviewer's having a bit of a laugh, saying if someone's forcing you to watch American football, these might make it bearable as they split in two. Bit sarcastic, eh? Next up is the Pokeball toy, $10 from Toys R Us, also about £6. Apparently this little beauty was nicked by someone called Will in the office. It's got Pokemon inside, and you can catch them, a real-life version of the game. They're even joking about trying to catch Pikachu without getting his tail caught in the screen. Sounds a bit fiddly. Following that, Rugrats dolls, also free from E3. Tommy Pickles, he's still going strong, isn't he? They reckon it's a decent doll, well made and all that, but not exactly the most exciting thing in a gaming mag. Rook. Then we get to the Pokemon trading card game, $10 again, Toys R Us. They're comparing it to Top Trumps, saying it's a good addition to the Pokemon universe. They admit it gets complicated, health points, energy spheres and all that jazz, but basically, you collect cards, battle your mates, and try to be the best. They're calling it a vital purchase, bit strong that, in it. Lastly, Ready 2 Rumble Light Shape, free from E3 again. They're calling it a useless bit of tat. Ha! A glow-in-the-dark sticker for your Ready 2 Rumble controller. Says it lasts a couple of minutes after you turn the light off. Proper naff, But hey, it was free use. And right at the bottom, there's a competition to win your own Mario Kart characters. All you had to do was answer what Bowser's name is in Japan. The answer they want, of course, is Bowser. Simple as that. Send a postcard to N64 Magazine in Bath before July 16, 1999. Good luck to anyone who actually bothered to enter. This page in N64 Magazine, blimey, takes me back. Right at the top there's a bit about Howard Lincoln, stepping down at Nintendo of America. Big news at the time, I suppose, if you followed all that business. Then there's a quirky idea from Blockbuster, Rentish Town, where you could rent a game and then buy it cheaper the week after. Seems a bit obvious now, but hey, it was the 90s. Moving down we have Fanzine Farm. Looks like they're reviewing a fanzine called NGT Issue 3 for $1.50. Apparently it's got a feature called What's Dat Den, and talks about games like Beetle Adventure Racing, Mike Piazza's Strike Zone, and GoldenEye and Turok 2. They say Turok 2 got a bit of stick in the review, poor show. Sounds like your typical fan effort, full of passion if not always polished prose. The main bulk is Retro World, a trip back to the days when penny racers were all the rage. Jason Moore's having a look back at some old school shooters. First up is Salamander on the Konami system, from '86. Says it was a favourite with the gaming press, and if you knew R-Type you'd get this. Apparently early copies even had some kind of organic look about them. Then there's Gradius 2, the sequel to Salamander, from '88. Also Konami. They reckon Konami didn't mess it up, kept the gameplay good. Lastly there's Rockman, or Mega Man as some called it. They reckon it might be known more for Street Fighter and Resident Evil these days, but Rockman was a proper platformer and shooter back then. They're saying Rockman spawned loads of sequels, but if you wanted a proper Capcom platformer you'd be better off with Bionic Commando. Harsh, but fair maybe? All classic games for their time, though maybe a bit basic by N64 standards. There's screenshots of all three games too, proper pixelated retro goodness. Jason Moore's Retro Game Shop is plugging itself at the bottom as well, naturally. This page is all about upcoming N64 games, proper exciting stuff for back then. The big headline is Resident Evil 2 coming to the N64, which was a massive deal. Remember all the buzz around that? Whoa! There's a Q&A section, bit of techie stuff, going on about the massive 512 megabit cartridge, which was huge at the time, wasn't it? Capcom needed all that space for the cutscenes and backgrounds, apparently. And they were worried about the price, saying Nintendo hinted it wouldn't go above 50 quid, which, looking back, was still a fair whack for a game. They mention there's two main characters, Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield, each with their own route through the game, different bits and bobs to find. Apparently there are secret characters too, like Fourth Survivor, and Storytolles, Tofu. A block of tofu, brilliant. Then there's the main article, going on about Resident Evil 2 being a zombie fest, finally arriving on the N64. The reviewer seems pretty chuffed, saying it's one of the best bits on the N64 all year. They saw an early version at E3, and reckon it's shaping up nicely. They mention it's a conversion of the PlayStation and PC game, which was obvious really, but they highlight the shiny extras Capcom have thrown in. They're impressed Capcom squeezed it all onto that huge cartridge, mentioning the old loading times on the PlayStation and PC, and how the N64 version is better in that regard. Graphically it's looking good, especially if you use the expansion pack, and they seem happy with the analog control. The release date was projected for November, which would have been ages away back then. Down at the bottom there's an info burst box about Resident Evil 2. Bit of quick info. It's from Capcom, cart size is 512 megabit, one player only, no memory pack, yes to expansion and rumble pack, no GB pack, and it was meant to be out in November everywhere, according to those flags US, UK and Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 red blobs out of 5, so pretty hyped for it. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One is Leon with a massive shotgun, another is some giant spider, yikes, and then a bunch of zombies milling about. One picture caption asks, "What would you do here? Inside a police station, and you're wounded." Deep stuff for a video game magazine, innit? This page has got a couple of game previews as you do back then in N64 Magazine. First up is Hybrid Heaven, Konami's new action RPG. It's looking better, they say, and it sounds like the camera was a bit dodgy before, but they've sorted it now, making it more like Zelda, which is good news. They mention something about body-swapping girlfriend and kidnapping the US president. Typical Japanese game craziness, eh? It's coming out in September. There's also a bit about Metal Gear Solid on the N64, but they say Konami has already said it's not happening, which is a shame, but they mention Castlevania 2, or Special Edition, which will be out later in the year instead. Well, then there's Mario Golf, which is looking like a laugh. Nintendo's tagline is, "For all players hoping to touch the true entertainment," a bit over the top, isn't it? But it sounds like a decent multiplayer game, not exactly Mario Kart on the green, but still some fun to be had, and it's supposed to be simple to play even if you're rubbish at golf games. Apparently there are 6 courses in the full game. It mentions Baby Mario to Evil Wario as characters, and Princess Toadstool's revealing golf attire. Cheeky. That's coming out in October now, and they reckon import copies might be hard to get hold of. Camelot, who made Hot Shots Golf on the PlayStation, are behind it, so it should be alright. They mention a ring shot mode, which they couldn't play. Sounds a bit odd. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 30, is having a look at Command & Conquer coming to the N64. It's got a big Q&A section which is quite useful, answering the obvious questions we all had at the time. Like how many levels? Apparently it's got all 50 from the PC version, so that's a decent amount, and no new units, just the PC ones but in fancy 3D, which, to be fair, in '99 was still pretty exciting. Story's the same old GDI versus Nodlark. There's a question about whether it's worth buying if you already had it on PC, and they're being pretty honest, saying it's mostly just cosmetic differences, with a few extra N64 levels. So, sounds like if you're a die-hard Command & Conquer fan, or never touched it on PC, then maybe it's worth a look. The reviewer mentions that the graphics are improved with 3D sprites and landscapes, and that the expansion pack is supported. It also says that the fog of war is still there, which was always a bit of a pain, wasn't it? They also mention that the C buttons on the N64 pad can be used to assign units, and Z is an instant menu, which sounds like they put some thought into the controls. They reckon it could be the best Command & Conquer game to date, but at the time it was only single player, though they hint at a possible 2-player mode later on. Down the side, there's an info burst panel giving the specs. 96 megabit cart, 1 player, memory puck and GB puck are no. Expansion and rumble pucks are yes. Release dates are June for the US, autumn for the UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 red blobs out of 5, so they seem reasonably keen. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows General Shepard in a videocom screen, another shows some base building and units. The captions are your usual gameplay pointers, like you gotta build stuff before you can attack, and that attacking a village is a bit unsporting cheeky. Another one mentions E3 and how good it looked there, and calls it the N64's first strategy game, which I suppose, strictly speaking, might be true on console at least. And there's a mention of the fog of war again, being all around you, like fog, surprisingly. Yeah, it's a decent preview, pretty much what you'd expect, setting the scene for Command & Conquer on the N64. This page is taking a look at a couple of games coming to the N64. First up, it's EPGA Golf, apparently aiming to be the top golf game on the console after a couple of duffers. They reckon it's an update to the Actua Golf series, with all the big European golf names like Faldo and that lot, though Tiger Woods is too famous to bother with apparently. 6 courses to play on, including the K Club in Ireland. The info burst box says it's coming out in September and needs a 128 meg cart. They reckon it plays like other golf games, which is hardly a revelation, and it's got a driving range, which sounds alright. They're asking if it'll be better than Mario Golf, and the reviewer is basically saying, probably not as fun, but it's a different kind of thing, more serious golf. Yeah. Then there's StarCraft, another PC conversion. They're calling it Command & Conquer in space, which is a fair enough description I suppose. You pick from 3 races, Terran, Protoss or Zerg, and battle through loads of missions. Controls are supposed to be similar to Command & Conquer, which is probably alright. They mention the graphics being a bit dodgy, which looking at the screenshots, yeah, they're not exactly pushing the N64 to its limits, are they? But they say co-op mode is good news. Info burst for this one says Nintendo is publishing, also a 128 meg cart but only 1 or 2 players. Expansion pack is needed, Rumble Pack 2, and it's out in September. They say the expansion pack is for 2-player co-op in the normal missions. When asked how it's different to Command & Conquer, the answer is basically, it's in space. Cheers for that groundbreaking insight. It's Warcraft 2 in space. Someone scribbled next to a screenshot, which is probably closer to the mark. Looks like your typical top-down strategy scrap. Might be alright if you're into that sort of thing on console. This page of the magazine is having a look at a couple of upcoming games, Revolt and Earthworm Jim 3D. Revolt is up first, and it's all about those little radio-controlled cars. Apparently, Acclaim, bless 'em, are bringing us a racer where you zoom around as these nippy little fellas. The reviewer seems quite chuffed about it, especially the track editor where you can build your own courses and save them on a memory pack to take to your mates' houses. Sounds like good fun for multiplayer then, and they say the handling is spot on. They're even comparing it to Micro Machines but reckon it's better. Bit bold that. Tracks are packed with stuff to bash about, set in places like toy shops and gardens. It's out in autumn, according to the flags US, UK and Japan. Looks like a laugh might be one to watch. Crankton Art. Then it's Earthworm Jim 3D. Crikey, they're still going with Jim, aren't they? This one's got a properly bonkers storyline. Something about Jim getting hit on the head by a cow and being stuck in his own brain while in a coma. Right then. Apparently Rockstar are publishing this one now, and the developers Viz are having a proper go at making it good. Graphics are looking decent, chunky and detailed, and the animations are top-notch. It's a 3D platformer with shooting bits, and it sounds like they're really leaning into the weirdness of Earthworm Jim, which is probably for the best. They reckon it's going to be out in winter. Sounds like it could be a bit of a laugh, if you're after something properly daft. This page in N64 Magazine talks about a couple of games coming soon. First up is Winback. Apparently Nintendo had a bit of a fiddle with it, which they reckoned was a good thing. It's being pitched as a stealth em-up, and they're saying it's a companion piece to GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, which is setting the bar pretty high, isn't it? They reckon it's like Metal Gear Solid but in 3D, which sounds alright if they can pull it off. Graphically they admit it's a bit basic, but they're banging on about the number of moves you can do. It's coming out in autumn in the UK, August in the US according to the little flags, maybe. Then there's Roadsters. They're saying Titus learnt their lesson from that Automobili Lamborghini game, which wasn't exactly a classic, was it? They've reused the engine, but they're promising to fix all the bits that were rubbish in Lamborghini. This one's a racer, obviously, with 30 cars and 10 tracks. You can even bet on yourself or other racers, which sounds a bit dodgy but could be a laugh. They're aiming to go head-to-head with World Driver, which was alright, I suppose. Handling's meant to be a bit wild, but they're sorting it. Roadsters is also due out in the autumn. Seems like they're both ones to keep an eye on, but let's not get too excited just yet, eh? This page is all about Road Rash 64, yeah, remember that one. So it's a preview, new pics plastered all over the top. Very exciting. They're saying it's proving motorbikes are dangerous, which, well, duh. They're going on about how good the controls feel, analog control and all that, and cheek flapping speeds, charming. Seems like the main point is to smack people off their bikes with tire irons, chains, clubs, even punches and kicks, classy stuff. They've got some screenshots, bit blocky looking, classic N64. One's got mid-air combat and jolly good written on it, bit over the top. Another one is more on-road violence, subtle. Gat. There's a Q&A section, someone's asking if Road Rash looks a bit plain. They're admitting it does, but reckon THQ are focusing on gameplay, which is fair enough. Then they're banging on about knocking people off bikes at 100 miles an hour, while avoiding civilian cars. Sounds like carnage. They're also asking about THQ moving on from wrestling and Rugrats games. Bit of an odd question in a Road Rash preview. Apparently they showed a new Rugrats board game, bit boring, and a fishing game, but also Nuclear Strike 64, which sounds alright, and they've got the rights to World League Soccer 99. Blimey, quite a diverse portfolio. They finish off saying Road Rash 64 is out in September, and they're looking forward to it, so they must be somewhat impressed. Down the bottom, there's an info burst bit. Developer is THQ, cart size 96 megabit, up to 4 players, memory and expansion packs are a yes, Rumble Pack 2 but no for the GB pack, whatever that is. Release is September everywhere, and they've given it a decent anticipation rating, 3 out of 5 of those red blobs. Seems like they're tentatively optimistic about it then. July 1999 at the bottom, yeah, takes me back. This page in N64 Magazine is all about World Driver Championship for the N64. Looks like they think it might finally be a decent racer for the console, as they say, the racing game we're all waiting for. They mention it's got the same handling feel as Top Gear Rally, which was alright back in the day, and is being developed by Boss Studios. They reckon it's got everything else you could ask for, good track design, balanced gameplay, and loads of cars. There's a little Q&A section where they ask about racing games at E3. Apparently Kemco had Top Gear Hyperbike, which needed a bit of work, and Top Gear Rally 2 was early in development but with a track editor. Ridge Racer was also there but only shown on video, which is a bit of a tease. They say World Driver Championship looked the best though, even compared to Ridge Racer on the PlayStation. Apparently Ridge Racer Type 4 was getting a lot of buzz, and was supposed to be good with new cars, tracks and 4-player mode, but they reckon World Driver Championship is out in a couple of months and looks superb. Bit premature to say it looks superb based on some screenshots, isn't it? Quarryshire. The main article goes on about how the N64 has been a bit short on proper racing games so far, and they're hoping this will be the one. They're comparing it to Top Gear Rally and V-Rally, saying the handling is similar to Tokay and its PC and PlayStation versions. They mention oversteer is a delicate thing and you can easily spin out, like in Top Gear Rally. They reckon it's a game that rewards practice. They're talking about 30 cars to unlock, 10 tracks with 3 different routes each, and 2-player mode. They also highlight a hires letterbox mode that doesn't need the expansion pack, which is good for those who didn't splash out on that bit of kit. Apparently, there's no pop-up or fogging, which was always a pain in some N64 games. They're hoping it'll be the racing game everyone's waiting for, and say they should have a review soon. There's an info burst panel with details, saying it's from GT, the cart size is 128 megabit, it's 1 or 2 players, memory and rumble packs are supported but not the expansion or GB packs. Release dates are June in the US, August in the UK, and TBA for Japan. They've given it a 5-star anticipation rating. Overall they seem quite optimistic about it, but we'll see when it actually comes out if it lives up to the hype, won't we? This page, then, is having a look at Gauntlet Legends coming to the N64. Remember Gauntlet? That old top-down dungeon crawler, proper 80s arcade stuff. Well, they've given it a 3D makeover for the N64, and it looks alright, I suppose. They're saying the backgrounds are high-res, and there are loads of enemies, which is what you want from a Gauntlet game, isn't it? Says it uses the expansion pack to make it look even better, which is fair enough, give it a bit of a boost. Apparently it's not quite arcade perfect, resolution-wise, but they reckon it's close. You can train up your character and save progress, pick from 4 characters and play with your mates. Classic stuff. They are hoping to add some extra bits to keep you playing longer on the N64, which is probably needed these days. Then over on the right there's an advert for Premier Manager 64. The only football management simulation you can play on N64, they're shouting. Bit desperate that, aren't they? Apparently endorsed by Kevin Keegan, which might mean something to some people, I suppose. Total football management and the only one you'd want to. Bit full of themselves, aren't they? Still, if you were desperate for a football manager game on the 64, this was probably it. Says it's by Gremlin, remember them? Proper old school developers. This page in the mag is previewing a couple of upcoming games, WCW Mayhem and F1 World Grand Prix 2. WCW Mayhem is getting a bit of a spotlight here. It's described as coming from EAA, so they're trying to big it up as the FIFA of wrestling games, which is a bit of a stretch really, isn't it? Apparently there's over 60 wrestlers in it, each with their own special moves, and loads of motion capture, which was the big buzzword back then. It sounds like your typical button basher, but they're promising player creation and even announcer commentary that speaks your created wrestler's name. That's a bit of a laugh if it works. They're making a point that it's not like the acclaimed WWF games, maybe trying to be a bit more sim-like, who knows? Then there's F1 World Grand Prix 2. It sounds like it's more of an update than a brand new game. Slightly tweaked semi-sequel is what they're calling it. Frame rates are a bit better, camera angles tweaked, teams updated with the driver changes, Villeneuve to BAR, all that jazz. They reckon it feels a bit samey though, not loads of new stuff, and surprisingly no expansion pack HUC support, which is a bit tight-fisted, isn't it, considering they could have used the extra memory. Still, they say the first-person view is top-notch, best ever in fact, which is a bold claim. They're saying it's out in July, so not too long to wait to see if it's any good, or just a reheated version of the first game. This page is all about the upcoming game Armorines. Looks like a claimer trying to bring us a bug-blasting gorefest. It's running on the Turok 2 engine, which at the time was pretty impressive visually, even if it was a bit foggy. The reviewer mentions it's similar to Turok 2, but they're tweaking the engine to make it look different, which is fair enough, you don't want it to just be a reskin. They talk about the insect enemies being really creepy, house-sized insects no less, and in one bit you can blast the face off a queen bug to reveal an insectoid skull. Sounds suitably gross. Apparently there's also an on-rails section in a military helicopter, which could be interesting or a bit naff, we'll have to wait and see. There's a Q&A section that confirms there'll be loads of different bugs in 5 environments, adapted to each setting, and that there will be Turok-style weaponry. At E3 they only had a plasma gun and rocket launcher available, but they promise more are coming and that weapons will morph from the Armorines body. A bit weird, but alright. There's also a little info box that says Armorines is from Acclaim, a 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, and supports memory and rumble packs, and even the GB pack, remember those things? It's coming out in winter, and they're giving it a high anticipation rating. Down at the bottom there's a big advert to be part of E3, where you can call a premium rate number to get an N64 exclusive E3 videotape for £3, for the first 1,500 callers. They're promising over half an hour of footage and mentioning games like Perfect Dark, Resident Evil 2, Jet Force Gemini, Donkey Kong 64, Eternal Darkness and Rika. Rika and Eternal Darkness are described as so secret that no screenshots have been released yet. Gotta love the hype back then. It's all a bit of a cheek to charge for a videotape really, but back then, getting video footage online wasn't quite the done thing, so I suppose you took what you could get. You had to fill out a form with your payment details if you wanted to pay by check or card too, all very pre-internet. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 30 it seems, is all about Shadowman. Remember that one? Always with the hideous murderers, according to the headline. Bit much really. Looks like they've got an exclusive on it. calling it an N64 Shadow Report. There's an editorial typical magazine stuff, welcoming you to their monthly Shadowman diary. Apparently Acclaim's latest blockbuster is getting some coverage here, and they're bragging about being in touch with the chaps at Iguana UK. Mr. Guy Miller, the creative director, is giving some insight into his work life, which, well, might be interesting for some. They're also teasing a review coming soon, calling Shadowman Zelda's evil twin. Bit dramatic, wasn't Zelda already quite good enough without an evil twin? Still, they say it's going to be utterly wonderful. We'll see about that. Poor old Mr. Scragmore, the printer, has been hospitalized apparently, hope he's alright. There are a couple of screenshots of Shadowman. One looks like some temple interior, where Shadowman is getting tattooed to swim in lava, which is handy I suppose. The other one mentions Phipps, the senior designer who put in the final boss, some evil Legion Trueform with artificial intelligence. Sounds a bit standard fare for the time, big bad evil guy from space and time. Anyway, more Shadowman stuff next month apparently if you are that bothered. This page of what looks like a dodgy knockoff magazine, called HAPEL Times, very funny, reckons it's from October 10th, 1888, which is a bit of a laugh. Anyway, it's previewing this game called Shadowman Bekaten. They're calling it Going Underground, and it's all about Jack the Ripper, apparently being one of 5 undead serial killers you'll be facing. It's set in the London Underground, which they say is based on a real disused station, where Churchill used to hang out during the war, which sounds a bit far-fetched, doesn't it? Looks like you kill enemies to collect energy from them, and you use it to open these soul gates. They're also banging on about the different ways each killer attacks, like Jack the Ripper can climb on ceilings and drop down on you. Sounds a bit creepy if you ask me. They're saying there are 7 boss characters, in total 5 serial killers, and a couple of others. Alongside Ripper, they mention Milton Pike, who's supposed to be a Vietnam vet and a cannibal, Avery Marks, who makes furniture out of body parts charming, and then some blokes called Marco Cruz and Dr. Victor Batrachian, and finally Dr. Death, who they just say is best not talked about. Cheerful bunch, aren't they? Apparently Shadowman's got this Zelda-style lock-on combat thing they're calling Circle Strafe, which they seem quite chuffed about. The reviewer says they can't wait to see the finished game, but then also have a bit of a sarcastic dig saying, somehow, we don't think Shadowman's gonna take that train. Cheeky. Still, looks like it could be a laugh if you're into that sort of dark and gory thing. Might be one to keep an eye on, back in '99. This page from Planet Game Boy looks like the contents page to me. It's shouting about WebBoy, which is a section about Game Boy websites back when the internet was still a bit of a novelty for some of us. They're highlighting what they reckon are the top 5 sites, and it looks like one of them is about the Game Boy camera. Photography play they are calling it. Then there's the reviews section, and they are going on about Luxury Mario, Rumble Racing and the best Pokemon tie ever. Sounds like they are reviewing Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, some kind of racing game, and Pokemon Pinball, which was brilliant fun actually. They also mention Mario DX, Drop Zone and Top Gear Rally are in there too. Looks like the reviews kick off on page 38. There's a big welcome to Planet Game Boy bit from the editor. Seems like they are chuffed with this issue, even though they reckon Game Boy stuff has been squeezed in a bit due to space in the magazine as a whole. They're raving about Pokemon Pinball and Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, calling them unmissable, so they must be good. They also mention the Super Game Boy Color, which they are calling the new baby, reckon it'll be like a sneeze in your pocket but better, with a bigger screen and more buttons. Project Dolphin is mentioned as well, which I think became the GameCube eventually, so they were looking ahead a bit there. Tips and Scores is next, giving us hints for Bomberman, Rugrats and some rally game, probably Top Gear Rally again. They've got a Secrets Revealed thing going on for those cheat codes we all loved. That's on page 41. Finally, Game Boy Gallery, calling it queer, which I guess was their way of being a bit edgy back then. It's all about photos people have taken with their Game Boy cameras, some real odd stuff there as you'd expect. That's on page 42, Witchy. And at the bottom, it's all the mag details. Planet Game Boy Issue 5 July 1999, with Martin Kitts as editor, and all the contributors like Justin Webb and Paul Edwards, and the rest of the team. Classic stuff. This page is a review section from an old N64 magazine, must be back from '99 sometime. Looks like they're taking a look at a couple of Game Boy games here. First up is Pokemon Pinball. They've given it a solid 5 stars, calling it essential purchase, which is pretty high praise. Seems like they were impressed, even though it's an import, and only in color, on the newer Game Boys. They mention it's got 2 tables, a red one which is easy, and a blue one which is trickier. And you can catch and evolve all those little monsters. Apparently you can even trade data with the infrared thingy, fancy that. Bah. Then below that there's Mario DX, also getting the full 5 stars, so they must have been in a generous mood. This one's 25 quid, And it's basically just the original Super Mario Bros, 1985 and all that. They say it's still as good as ever, even if it's not quite as deep as Mario Land 2, which is fair enough. But they've added some new modes to spice it up, like a time trial thing called Red Coin Challenge and a versus mode. And you can save your game this time, unlike the NES version, which is a plus, I suppose. They've got screenshots for both games showing the pinball table with a Ditto and the classic Mario level with a Goomba, and then a two-player link-up shot with Mario and Luigi. Good times, simple graphics, simple gameplay, but we loved it back then, didn't we? This page is a review page from a gaming mag, probably one of those N64 ones back in the day. First up, they're having a look at Top Gear Rally on the Game Boy Color. Remember that Rumble Pack thing for the Game Boy? Yeah, they mentioned that like it was some big deal. Apparently the game looks alright at first glance, but after you've played it a bit, they reckon it's not all that amazing. They compare it to V-Rally and the older Top Gear games, saying the tracks are pretty basic, just straights and simple corners, not much challenge really. They do say the N64 version is prettier, but this Game Boy one is just okay. The reviewer even mentions you can see corners coming miles off by just tapping the brake, so it's not exactly pushing you to your limits. Apparently there's only ever one other car on screen most of the time, which sounds a bit lonely. They mention the Rumble Pack going mad and that you unlock more tracks and cars as you go on. Overall they give it 3 out of 5 stars, saying it's alright, but nothing special. Read today. Then underneath there's a review for Drop Zone on the Game Boy. Now Drop Zone, that's a proper old school name, isn't it? They call it an Archer McLean classic, which it kind of was. Apparently it's on the Game Boy for the first time ever, which is a bit mad to think about now. They say it plays as brilliantly as it always did, which is probably a bit of nostalgia talking. Simple premise, you're a space soldier blasting aliens and rescuing humans in side-scrolling levels. Power-ups, tricky aliens, blunderstorms, sounds like standard stuff for the time. They do say it gets properly difficult after the first few levels, and later on it becomes ridiculously hard, especially when the gravity goes all weird. They reckon it'll keep you busy on the bus home, and give it a decent 4 out of 5 stars, comparing it to Defender, which is a fair shout. So yeah, a couple of Game Boy reviews, Top Gear Rally a bit meh, Drop Zone a bit better, typical mid-90s handheld gaming stuff. This page is all about the early days of the internet and Game Boy, a bit of a blast from the past really. Back in '99, they were still wondering if the internet was actually going to be a thing for gaming, bless them. They're highlighting a few websites dedicated to the grey brick and its games. First up is EAGB, apparently the best Game Boy resource on the net, quite a claim. They mention it's good for Japanese import stuff, so you could find bits on Pokemon Pinball and Tokimeki Memorial, which were probably a bit exotic back then. Apparently there's also a Pikachu diary, which they say will make you cry. Melodramatic much? Next is GBC Dojo, which sounds like your typical news and rumor site, keeping you up to date with the latest goings-on in the Game Boy world. They mention music downloads too, which is pretty standard internet fare even back then. Butaya. Then there's Photography, dedicated to the Game Boy camera, remember that? Mad little thing. They say it's got tips and instructions, and a gallery for your artistic Game Boy snaps. I remember taking some absolute shockers with that camera. Good times. Kana. Game Boy Monolith seems to be the proper encyclopedia site, packed with everything you could possibly want to know about Game Boy. Tips, cheats, the whole shebang. They reckon it's easy on the eyes, which is always a bonus on the early web. Cheats. Finally, Pokemon Abode. Unsurprisingly all about Pokemon. They say it's crammed with cute little monsters, even going as far as to host other Pokemon sites within it. Sounds like a proper fan site, with wallpapers and artwork to tart up your Windows 98 desktop. They even have a bit of a joke about Pikachu being overexposed. Can't imagine that ever happening, can you? Warranty a Descock. So yeah, that's the internet according to N64 Magazine in 1999. Simpler times for Game Boy fans online. This page is all about tips and high scores, classic stuff for a gaming mag back in the day. Right at the top, we've got Rugrats and Pocket Bomberman passwords. Rugrats passwords like train crash and hospital, very descriptive, eh? Pocket Bombermans are just numbers, a bit less exciting, but no doubt useful if you were stuck. Moving down, there's Top Gear Rally, remember that? Apparently you could unlock all cars and tracks with some code, VQXZ%Z. And a slightly bizarre tip about Softer Rumble involving paper and the Game Boy cartoon Genius, if a bit Heath Robinson. They even suggest it helps with Pokemon Pinball. Of all things, Utaya. Then, Game & Watch Gallery 2 gets a look in with tips for unlocking stuff. Pause and press B for a border change. Nice and simple. Bonus game is earned with 15 stars, and you can play as Wario in Helmet if you lose before 100 points. And retry secrets weren't exactly hard to come by in these games, were they? Finally, there's the high score section, always a good bit of competition. Tetris DX is dominating. as you'd expect, with some fella called Paul Bush topping the charts on 40 lines Ultra and Marathon. Fair play to him, must have put in some hours on the brick game. And then Game & Watch Gallery high scores, lots of Scandinavian names there it seems, showing us Brits how it's done on Donkey Kong and Parachute. They're even asking for folks to send in their own scores, by post or email no less. Very modern. Looks like they're after bragging rights and maybe a dubious prize. Simpler times. This page of the magazine is all about the Game Boy camera. Remember that thing? Game Boy Gallery, it shouts at the top. And it's like a reader submissions section, a bit like those funny photos bits you used to get in newspapers, but all done with the grainy black and white pictures from the Game Boy camera. They've titled it, "Stop Your Grinning and Drop Your Linen." Bit cheeky for N64 Magazine, isn't it? Seems like they've been flooded with dodgy pictures from readers again. They're calling them classy pictures of low-down mutants and dubious body parts. Sounds about right for what we were all doing with those cameras. This month's winner used Venetian blinds to make a Dracula picture. Cecilia Schultze-Olsen from Sweden apparently, and a Depeche Mode fan. Good for her, I suppose. Beat it. Looking at the snaps, we've got Adam Refford from Manchester, who sent in a picture of a hand with a face on it. They're calling it Mr. Hand. Daryl Sage sent in a creepy Quatermass effort, which is a bit of a weird shadowy face. There's Rosemary Lilly's picture, of Christina Ricci, as Wednesday Addams Raddington's Rosemary. They're calling it. Clever. Someone called Judd really liked a devil cat picture from Stephen Hutchins. Looks like a blurry cat with funny eyes. Then there's Elwyn from Solihull. They've sent in a picture of someone who looks a bit like one of the village people, and they're calling it ugly? Yes. Ashley Jego is blamed for utter rubbish. Another blurry face. David Teixeira from New Zealand is back again, apparently, with another gallery appearance. This one is a close-up of teeth, and they are saying it's lovely, with a hint of sarcasm I reckon. Rahul Bakshi from Dover sent in a picture where they're not sure if it's a human face anymore. It's a bit messed up looking, fair play. James Merton sent in a picture of a rat, and they're joking they've called Rent-A-Kill. Mark Evans from St. Helier sent in an incriminating photo of some nasty Pikachu abuse. Can't quite make that one out. Daniel Kilfoyle from Swinton is a crossdresser apparently, and they say, "Nice pecs Dan, bit forward." Lucy Green sent in a picture called Mrs. Apple. Someone looks like they've been surfing in dark brown seas of Cornwall, whatever that means. Jeffrey Eyre something sent in a picture with nice handwriting. Greg Duncan sent in a picture of a lumpy old chap. Ryan Medlock sent in a picture of the crazy Goron, a Zelda reference there of course. They're still asking for more pictures and saying they've seen more sickening GB camera pics than you've had hot dinners. Reckon they've seen some truly awful stuff. If you send in a pic and it's good, you could win a brand new game, they say. The address is Planet Game Boy, N64 Magazine, in Bath. Right, well good luck to anyone sending in their blurry masterpieces. This page is all about the great multiplayer extravaganza from N64 Magazine. We've got a chap dressed like James Bond at the top there, which is probably to tie in with GoldenEye 007, no doubt. Formal. Below that, there's a list of names, the finalists they're calling them, blokes from all over the UK like Essex, Shrewsbury and Newcastle. Looks like these were the top players in some kind of gaming competition, Newcastle. Then we get to the game scores. It seems they were playing a few different games. F-Zero X on Devil's Forest 2 track, which was a proper fast racing game back then on the 64, always good for showing off the console's power. GoldenEye 007 is there too, naturally. Bunker 2 level. Accuracy must have been key in that one, judging by the 500% scores. Bit of a weird score system if you ask me, but hey ho. Turok 2 also gets a mention, level 1 it seems, and Mario Kart, Bowser's Castle level. Mario Kart 64, still a blast with mates even now, proper party game that one was. Down the side, there's Mario himself in his kart, advertising an update section, presumably in the magazine, and at the bottom a voucher for £5 off N64 games at Virgin Megastores, needing to spend £30 or more mind you. Valid until July 99, so anyone reading this back then would have needed to be quick to use it. It also mentions the event itself will be covered in the next issue, out on the 12th of July. So if you missed the multiplayer extravaganza at the Virgin Megastore, you could read all about it next month, apparently. Bargain voucher if you were already planning to pick up a pricey N64 game, I suppose. This page then, right, it's a proper look at Perfect Dark, and blimey, they were really pushing it as the GoldenEye sequel, weren't they? Even better than GoldenEye, it screams, bold as brass across the page. Of course everyone was buzzing for this back then. GoldenEye was the absolute king on the N64, still is for many, really set the bar for console shooters. There's a box out they call Infoburst with all the game details. Made by Rare and Nintendo, naturally. Cart size was 256 megabit, which was pretty beefy for back then. 1 to 4 players, so multiplayer deathmatch was a given, thankfully. Memory pack? No. Expansion pack and rumble pack both yes. GB pack yes as well. And it was slated for December 99 release, with a full 5 red blobs for anticipation rating. They were properly hyped, weren't they? Then there's the main article, banging on about how GoldenEye was still being played ages after release, and how everyone got excited when talk of a sequel started. They mentioned Tomorrow Never Dies game. Didn't turn out great, that one, did it? And they go on about how Rare, after losing the Bond license, doubled down and made something new using their GoldenEye know-how. They say Perfect Dark was built from scratch, a whole new feel, new name, female lead, the lot. They even went to LA and E3 to see it. Bit of a trek. They end it saying, Tomorrow Never Dies was a bit rubbish, and ask, Perfect Dark, possibly the N64's greatest game yet? A bit strong maybe, but they were clearly impressed. Looking at the screenshots, yeah, it looks a bit like GoldenEye in places, but definitely shinier, more detailed. You can see they were pushing the N64 hardware. One shot's got a futuristic taxi, another shows a first-person view with a laser sight on a gun, and another looks like some kind of grimy back alleyway. All very slick for the time. So yeah, Perfect Dark, big deal back then, and rightly so, mind you. Did live up to the hype mostly, didn't it? Good times. This page delves into Perfect Dark, doesn't it? It's a special investigation, see? Looking at a walkthrough, and some of the weapons you'll be getting your hands on. For the walkthrough, it seems to be all about using mines. Apparently, in some locked-off areas, Min's Dark, that's Joanna Dark to you and me, is going to be handy with updated versions of Bond's mines, which is a bit cheeky, isn't it? They'll blow up bits of scenery to open up new paths after the bang. They mention the mines will be timed and remote and all that, specifically made for Perfect Dark, and even computer-controlled plastique. Sounds like a right old explosive time. Then we get to the weapons, and blimey, they sound a bit special. First up is the Far Sight. Straight out of that Arnie film, Eraser they say. It lets you see through walls and shoot through them too. Bit mad really. Apparently it picks up body heat, locks onto enemies, and fires these metal-tipped bullets. How does that even work? Still, sounds brilliant for sneaking about. Next, night vision goggles. Standard stuff really, but they reckon they'll be vital in the Datadyne level when the lights go out. Everything goes green, and you can hunt down the enemy, but watch out when the lights come back on. Apparently it blinds you while you're getting shot at. Lovely. Finally, there's the alien gun. This one sounds like a right beast. They say it feels like a half-sized RCP-90, firing loads of yellow nail-like bullets really fast. Rapid fire is always good, isn't it? And you can fire it side-in John Woo style, which is a bit daft but fun. They reckon having 2 of them is wonderful. Bit much maybe, but alright. Bakol. There's also a bit at the start, Deja Move, talking about the motion capture. Apparently, Rare built this fancy new motion capture studio, but the E3 version of Perfect Dark still had the old GoldenEye enemy animations. But they said they'd already recorded some new motion capture stuff, so it would be in the final game. More body-specific shots and heads flicking back, they reckon. Sounds a bit grim, but I suppose that's what they were going for. All in all, seems like Perfect Dark is shaping up nicely, lots of explosions and fancy gadgets, just what you want from a shooter back then. This page then, is a look at Perfect Dark, and blimey it was a looker back then, wasn't it? It's boasting about concrete Perfect Dark playing details, and telling you to lock and load. Bit dramatic, but that's mags for you. The article kicks off describing the Datadyne building in the game, saying it's proper realistic architecture with fancy waiting areas, sofas and tables for effect, all to help with those stealthy shot-in-the-back tactics. They mention carpeted areas and tasty chrome finishing, and even marble pillars, very swish for an N64 game, mind. Apparently you can look out of windows and see skyscrapers, which was a big deal for console games at the time. There's a section talking about the Dostave pistol, comparing it to the gun in GoldenEye 007, saying it's still superb and has a laser sight for precise targeting. Then they get onto the weapons, showing off the AR-34, which they say is like the alien gun from GoldenEye, rapid fire and accurate for taking out multiple enemies. Lassen. Next up is the rocket launcher, which they reckon is lethal with its lock-on feature. They mention maximum body part scatterage, which is a bit gruesome, even for back then. They do warn you not to fire it in small rooms, which is probably good advice. Finally, there's the machine gun, which fires rounds faster than you can blink. Apparently, it sways a bit like the KFV Soviet, meaning you need to use lock-on to take down enemies. There's a bit of a warning about the rocket launcher again, with a caption saying, "Nasty? Ooh yes," and "It's not got caution written on its side for nothing, you know." Bit of an understatement if you ask me. war. Lastly, they're raving about this conference room, saying it's unbelievably empty but has loads of detail, and that Rare, those legends, have lavished incredible amount of time on the design. They reckon the detail is astonishing, and you can see through rooms and pick out helicopters swooping past the glass. Bit over the top maybe, but Perfect Dark was pretty special at the time, can't deny that. This page is from N64 Magazine, right? Must be from back in '99 I reckon, talking about Perfect Dark. It's a special investigation apparently. First off, they're banging on about this new scanner gadget in Perfect Dark. Sounds a bit like a gimmick, but apparently you can point it at stuff, even people from a distance, and it tells you what it is, what it does, and if it's dangerous. They show a screenshot where it's saying a weapon may explode if shot, which is a bit dramatic. Warily, then it moves on to the environments, the levels in the game. Datadyne Rooftop, they're saying it's got this great cutscene with a helicopter, and you have to be all stealthy. Datadyne Labs sounds more interesting with alien trolley escape and nicking an alien gun, because why not, eh? Chinatown is like Blade Runner apparently, rainy, smog, steam jets, all that jazz, plus VIP protection missions and chicken with cashew nuts tasty. Shipwreck is the last one, borrowed from alien films they say, proper dark and scary underwater spaceship with distant screams. Sounds a bit intense for a laugh with your mates. Apparently there's a computer console in Shipwreck that's like the ones in GoldenEye facility, which is a nice touch, very familiar. Goris. Deathmatches, they're going on about those. Apparently Rare admitted that Perfect Dark has got Temple and Complex from GoldenEye in it for multiplayer. Bit cheeky nicking levels from your old game, but fair enough I suppose. They were good maps. But they're also promising loads of new ones. Around 12 apparently, including ones from the single-player missions like the Datadyne Labs and the alien spaceship level, plus a couple more favorites. They've tarted them up with new lighting and textures to make them look a bit fresher. The big thing though is you can now drop down holes and jump from higher bits, which changes those old GoldenEye levels quite a bit. And they're saying these levels are great for sniping, with this Farsight rifle, which is supposed to be a game changer in deathmatches. Apparently, it completely changes deathmatches forever. Bit of a bold claim there. Worry. Lastly, there's a bit about the Game Boy pack. Basically, you can take a picture of your face with the Game Boy camera, download it onto your N64, and then use your face on your multiplayer character in Perfect Dark. Bit of a laugh, I suppose. You can make yourself fat, thin, beardy, clean-shaven, mulleted, whatever you fancy. They reckon it's mind-blowing, a bit strong that, but it is a neat little feature, I suppose. Typical Rare showing off a bit. This page from N64 Magazine in July '99 has got an interview with Duncan Botwood, who's the designer for Perfect Dark. It's all about the upcoming game, and they're digging into what inspired it. Turns out they were big fans of films like Blade Runner, and they liked how GoldenEye was set up, and they're building on that for Perfect Dark. Plot-wise, it's their own take on the whole future alien contact thing. They talk about the GoldenEye engine and how they've reworked it quite a bit for Perfect Dark, saying you can fall off edges now, which you couldn't do in GoldenEye, so a bit more freedom to move around. There's a briefing system like in GoldenEye with Carrington, a bit like Moneypenny apparently. Weapon-wise, they're promising loads, mentioning different types for different factions in the game. Cartridge size is going to be a whopping 256 megabits, which is pretty big for the time. Storyline is important, apparently with cutscenes at the start and end of levels. Deathmatch is getting bots, which they're excited about, so you can play with computer control players if you haven't got mates handy. They're hoping to get bots with different characters, and you can team up with them. The Farsight weapon is mentioned as a favorite of Duncan because it sounds like they tweaked sniping in multiplayer, so it's not just stationary campers. They've also incorporated the RAM pack for high-resolution graphics, and they're looking at Dolby surround sound too. Level-wise, they're aiming for around 22 levels, split into 12 or 13 missions, and they give an example of the first mission being in 3 parts: Skyscraper, Basement Labs, and Getting Out Again. They're not including a jump button though, reckons it's not needed, like Zelda games manage fine without one, fair enough I suppose. SciTac. Multiplayer-wise, you can play on your own if you're friendless, and you can pick a bot character from a list with different personalities and fighting styles. Sounds a bit like they're trying to give bots a bit more character than just cannon fodder. You can even map your face onto the bots with the Game Boy camera, which is a bit of a novelty I guess. There's a bit in a box out to the side mentioning the search and destroyed bits in the game and how detailed the alien shipwreck section is, with dead aliens and brain splatter. Bit gruesome. This page is a special investigation into Donkey Kong 64. They're asking if it's any good, but with a bit of a cheeky, how could it not be attitude, aren't they? It talks about the usual Donkey Kong stuff, swinging from vines to get around, and they're showing off this artillery tortoise boss, which they reckon is one of the game's big boss encounters. There's an info burst box that tells you the important bits. It's from Rare and Nintendo, no surprises there, they're usually pretty reliable. The game's on a 256 megabits cartridge, which is a decent size for an N64 game. It's for 1 to 4 players, though not sure how you'd get 4 players going on a Donkey Kong adventure. Rumble Pack is in, memory and expansion packs are out, and no Game Boy Pack support either. It's due out on November 22nd, so just around the corner at the time, and they've given it a full 5 red blobs for anticipation, so they must be expecting good things. Looks like there's some shades of Rusty Bucket Bay, referring to Banjo-Kazooie, must be a similar sort of level design vibe maybe. And they're showing a screenshot of Chunky Kong about to be flattened by a spiked roller, poor bloke. Apparently the swimming bits are even better than Banjo-Kazooie's. That's a bold statement considering how good those were in Banjo. This page is all about Donkey Kong 64, seems like they've got to have a look at it over at E3 in Los Angeles. They're calling it Monkey Shines, and it's broken down into sections about different bits of the game. First up is Diddy Kong Racing, and it sounds like Tiny Kong is doing some kart racing like a huge 8-mungus scale extric, which is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Apparently you can switch lanes and dodge obstacles, and the opponents are a right pain trying to scupper your efforts. Then there's Minecart Madness, which is bringing back those minecart levels from the old Donkey Kong Country games on the SNES, but updated for 64. The idea is to collect coins and avoid crashing, leaning into corners and all that jazz. Next is Barrel Full of Kremlings. Sounds like one of those mini-games you get in these sorts of games. It's like those seaside arcade machines, where you whack crocodiles, but with Kremlings popping out of barrels. Reflexes are key to stop them from nobbling you, whatever that means. Monkey Barrel Rocket is another one. Barrel firing like in the old SNES games, but now in 3D. You have to smash things up by firing yourself from barrel to barrel, first-person view to aim. Sounds a bit chaotic, which is probably the point. Foray. There's a bit about the characters too, character class. Donkey and Diddy are back obviously, but they've got some new mates. Tiny, Chunky and Lanky. Tiny is a small female Kong with ponytails to fly. Chunky is the big strong one, slow but powerful. And Lanky is the interesting one, with long flailing arms. Right then, finally, surprise time. Seems Funky Kong has got a shop in this game that shows up in most levels, but when they asked him about it, Funky said it wouldn't be open until Christmas. So they're wondering if there's going to be a Christmas event in the game, or if the whole game is time-coded to unlock at Christmas. Bit far-fetched maybe, but who knows. Looks like they were pretty impressed overall, reckon it's going to be a cracker. More ambitious, advanced and packed full of pure gaming quality than almost anything that's coming up. Strong words for July, 1999. This page in N64 Magazine from back in the day, issue 30 it is all about Donkey Kong 64. Remember that? It was a big deal at the time. They're calling it ape equipment, and showing off some of the bits and bobs the Kongs can use. There's talk about weapons, like a shotgun for Donkey Kong, a bazooka for this new Kong called Chunky who's supposed to be massive and strong, and even pistols for Diddy Kong. Bit like in that film Face/Off they mention, bit random. Oh, and a jetpack also for Diddy, like the rocket belt from Pilot Wings, but apparently easier to control. Then there's a section about the visuals. Visuals, funnily enough, they're banging on about the coloured lighting and shadows, saying it's all very impressive, and how you can see miles into the distance without any fogging. They mention it's all thanks to the expansion pack, which you needed to buy separately to get the full shebang, remember that? A bit cheeky really, but we all forked out for it, taka. They also have a little section called Future Look, where they're going on about how Rare always predict the future in their games, like Wrinkly Kong in Donkey Kong Country 3, which was on the SNES, or SNES as some people still say. They're wondering if there's going to be anything Dolphin related in Donkey Kong 64, Dolphin being the code name for the GameCube back then, before we knew what it was going to be called. Always speculating, weren't we? Towards the end they have a bit of a moan about the camera, saying it's a bit like Banjo-Kazooie, where you have to tap R to center it, and it's not always that accurate. But then they sort of backtrack and say, because the game is so massive, it's probably alright. They're quite excited for it coming out in 4 months, and joking about thanking Rare for it all. Bit over the top, but that was magazines back then. This page is a review for Star Wars Episode 1, Racer from N64 Arena Magazine. It's all about that pod racing game based on the Phantom Menace, which, well, the film itself was a bit Marmite, wasn't it? But this game, they're saying it's good, even comparing it to Wipeout, but much, much better. Which is fighting talk. They've got a big picture of Jar Jar Binks Racer, which, you know, typical Jar Jar. But they've also got a close-up of a proper racer, that Doug fella Saboka or something, looking a bit menacing. They've got their scoring system explained, going from 85% and above, which gets you a star game, Badge the Holy Grail back then down to 190%, which is basically bin fodder. They break down the score into visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, and blimey, they've given it 9 out of 10 in all categories, so it must be alright then. Gobsmacking graphics for the N64, tunes are any good, make use of the incredible hardware, and weeks of play, all the things you wanted to know back then. It's got a verdict section too, saying how much fun is this game gonna give you? Well, according to them, quite a lot if all those 9s are anything to go by. So yeah, looks like N64 Arena liked pod racing. Maybe more than the film itself, which isn't saying much, is it? This page in N64 Magazine takes me right back, kicking off with Charlie Blast's Territory, a puzzle game, apparently a brain-tickling puzzlement according to them, and they reckon it's a good un. Then there's a bit called Import Arena. Always liked that section, showing off the games they were playing over in America and Japan. Looks like Super Bowling is featured, described as bowling in Nuttall Bad Shocker, whatever that means, and bottom of the 9th, which is baseball, for when everything else fails, as they put it. Down below there's Team 64, seems to be a feature on the magazine staff. There's a picture of them all lounging about, and little boxes with their thoughts on games. Pete Travers reckons Super Bowling is his game of the month, saying he looked like he was watching Corrie rather than playing, and apparently he's wrinkly and old and mumbles. Charming. Will Overton's game of the month is Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, saying something about changing his name to Deed Poll and Darth Barnett, and some nonsense about Reed Bits. Tim Weaver also picked Star Wars Racer. Apparently he was wearing a jumper in N64 27ths, and people think he smells funny, bless him. Andrea Ball, another Star Wars Racer fan, was refusing to sit between someone called Baldy and Sweary, and did a scared impersonation at a Boyzone concert, very 90s. Then there's Justin Webb, also on Super Bowling, something about piloting a chair and missing a lamppost, and someone called Judd losing an arm. Sounds like a typical day at the office. Paul Edwards is flying the flag for Charlie Blast's Territory, talking about sewage in Newquay and hang 10 in his pants. Says it's gnarly, radical and pilfy, right then. Martin Kitts is another Star Wars Racer convert, raving about 600 miles per hour sofa racing and squashing badgers, lovely. Finally, Jez Bickham, also on the Star Wars bandwagon, apparently thinks he's a Yankee after a trip to America, and threatened to kick your ass, boy, at Martin, and ended up in hospital. Bit harsh. So there you have it, Star Wars Episode 1. Racer is clearly the big thing that month, judging by all the Game of the Month picks, alongside Super Bowling, and a nod to Charlie Blast's Territory. Good times. This page is about Star Wars Episode 1, Racer. Looks like a preview in N64 Magazine, issue 30. Right then, Racer, coming out for the N64. They're banging on about how great the racing is. Great racing game you are. Bit dramatic, lads. Seems like they're quite chuffed with it, saying if this is anything to go by, the Phantom Menace game might actually be decent, even if the film isn't winning any awards. They reckon the critics have got it wrong on this one and that it's tremendous fun. There's a little info burst bit, says it's from LucasArts and Nintendo, 256 megabit cartridge, 1 or 2 players. Controller pack and rumble pack are go, but no expansion pack, or GB pack. It's out now in the UK and US, and TBA for Japan, whatever that means, probably to be announced later on. Cost is 50 quid, a bit steep but standard for new N64 games back then. Porinton Millis. They mention there are 25 tracks across loads of Star Wars planets, some from the films, and maybe some made up. Planets listed include Tatooine, Mongaza, Ando Prime, Akularis, Malastare, Ovo EV, Audibana, and Barunda. Screenshots look alright, bit blocky as you'd expect, showing off some pod racers and tracks. One bit mentions approaching a 0G section on OVO IV, and another one is about Anakin's QPR striped pod racer being good for beginners. They seem to like the first-person camera view as well, calling it stonkingly good fun. Yeah, well, we'll see about that when it actually comes out properly, won't we? But it does look like it might be a bit of alright, could be good for a laugh with mates. This page features Star Wars Episode 1, Racer for the N64, looking at the upgrade system and shopping around for parts. Right at the top, it's got a bit about shop around, saying you can buy pod parts from dealers or rummage around in the junkyard. They mention you might find turbo engines and cooling systems, all that sort of thing. Apparently, the junkyard owner's a bit of a pain if you try to nick anything, and recycled parts might blow up in your face. Sounds about right for a dodgy back alley parts dealer in a Star Wars game. They even mention pit droids being needed to repair stuff you find there. Then there's an upgrades section, explaining you can spend your credits on new bits for your pod racer. It lists the areas you can upgrade, things like traction, acceleration, brakes, turning, top speed, cooling, and repair. They make a point of saying cooling and repair are just as vital as the speed stuff, which is probably true when you're barreling along at hundreds of miles an hour and sparks are flying. It also warns about cheap parts failing on you during a race, so you get what you pay for, I suppose. There's a bit called Kerrash, which is about crashing. They say if you hit something hard enough, your pod explodes into tiny bits. The reviewers got a bit of a moan about the explosion effect, calling it the worst visual effect in the game, because it's all over so quickly. 1 minute you're racing, the next your craft has vanished and there's just some polygons and air left. A bit harsh maybe, but I suppose in '99 we were getting used to things looking a bit more fancy, even on the N64. They end it with, "Damn shame that, a bit dramatic for a crash, eh?" Throughout the page there are screenshots of the game, showing menus and the pod racer in action. It all looks quite speedy and futuristic, which was the vibe they were going for with episode 1 back then. Looking back now, it was a decent racer, and the upgrade system probably added a bit of depth to it. This page is all about a track tour for Star Wars Episode 1, Racer on the N64, feeling a bit like we're back in '99 in it. They're running through the amateur circuit tracks here. Looks like there are 25 tracks in total in the game, across 4 leagues. This page focuses on the first 3 amateur tracks to give you a taster. Junti. First up is the Boonta training course on Tatooine, track favorite Sebula apparently. They call it the simplest track to learn, good for getting used to the controls, especially that Z button for negotiating corners. Seems like the rocky sections are the only real hazard, and they even give you a tip to hold Z, ease the joystick for sweeping bends. Helpful enough, I suppose. Then there's Momgaza Speedway, on Momgaza, with Team Topagiales as the track favorite. This one's described as short and fast, a favorite already for time trials it seems. They reckon it's wide enough to avoid crashes, making it good for perfecting your racing line, and getting some decent lap times in. Tip here is to use boost on the long straight, and watch out for tight corners. Ori. Finally there's Bedo's Wild Ride on Ando Prime, and Aldar Bedo is the track favorite for this one. They say this is an icy track, and the bright white backgrounds can be a pain for visibility. Cheers for the heads up. Apparently the slipperiness doesn't affect the handling much though, which is good to know. They mention horrendous tunnels and arches to navigate. The tip here is about tilting the engines back for softer landings after big jumps. Solid advice if you want to keep your racer in one piece, I guess. Atawi. So yeah, that's the amateur circuit track tour. Pretty standard magazine fare back then, breaking down the tracks and giving you some pointers. Not bad if you were just getting into the game and wanted a bit of a leg up. This page in N64 Magazine, yeah, it's all about Star Wars Episode 1, Racer. Remember that pod racing game? They're running through a few of the tracks here. First up is Aqualaris Classic, which they reckon looks like something out of Mad Max, talking about dark tunnels and multiple routes. The reviewer, or whoever wrote this, says it's a bit tricky and you need a practice lap or 2. Track favorite is apparently a Clegg Holdfast, whoever that is. Then there's Malastar 100. Set in some kind of swamp, they compare it to the Death Marshes from Turok 2, remember that one? Buzzing insects and toxic vapor trails, sounds lovely. They say this one's more about speed than corners, and easier than Aqualaris or Bedo, so that's something, I suppose. Track favorite here is a Bowed Bolt. Next up is Vengeance. Apparently a standard start, but then it gets into spinning cogs and zero-gravity sections with asteroids and energy beams. Sounds a bit hectic, doesn't it? They're calling it the prettiest track, make of that what you will. Track favorite for this one is a Fudsang. Finally, there's Spice Mine Run, the last track in the amateur circuit set in the spice mines of Momgaza, which they say is like Wipeout 64. Dusty gloom and undulating surfaces, that sounds about right for a mine. You need to finish in the top 3 on this one to move up a class, so a bit more pressure. Track favorite is Wars Guo. Oh, and there's a bit about the Price is Right, which is the betting system in the game. You can choose fair, skilled, or winner takes all, and bet your truggets. Fair gets you 800 for first, down to 100 for fourth. Skilled bumps it up to 1200 for first, and winner takes all is a massive 2200 for first place only, nothing for anyone else. Bit risky that one. This page from N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Episode 1, Racer. Remember that one? Blimey, seems like ages ago now, doesn't it? They're talking about the booster system, bit of a faff to get going properly, having to hold the stick, then release and tap. Fiddly is the word they use, and yeah, they're spot on there. Engine temperature, fatal blowouts, sounds a bit dramatic, but you had to keep an eye on it, that's for sure. Smart move to get a cooling system upgrade early doors, they reckon. Tap. Then there's the camera angles bit. Standard stuff for 3D games, but they reckon Racer makes a bigger deal of it. Chase cam, zoomed in, zoomed out, driver's eye view, all present and correct. Driver's eye is where it's at for proper racing feel, isn't it? They say it puts you in the driving seat. Literally, lies I. And the pit droids, yeah, those little fellas. Useful they were, repairing your pod between races. More droids, less time fixing your knackered engines, makes sense. They are saying you'll be spending your hard-earned credits on those upgrades and pit droids, basically, to keep your racer in top nick. They mention the speed, nearly 500 miles per hour, apparently, in the game. Hardly time to admire the scenery at that pace, which, let's be honest, the prequels, well, the scenery was probably the best bit for some of us, wasn't it? Right at the end, they are comparing it to Wipeout 64 and XG2, saying it's arguably better than them. Bit strong that, isn't it? Wipeout was pretty iconic, but they are banging on about the visual style, saying it's unmistakable. And yet, it did look the part, all shiny and futuristic and Star Warsy. They even compare it to Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise. Bit of a reach that, but I get what they mean, high-speed racing and all that. Pure racing, they say. No Ewoks or Caribbean comedy creatures, thank goodness for small mercies. Just pod racing like it should be. Visual style is the best thing, according to them, which, yeah, fair enough. It looked pretty decent for the time. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, on the N64. It's part of their N64 Arena section and focuses on the two-player mode. They reckon it's alright, fast and pretty, but not as good as it could have been, which is a bit of a lukewarm start, isn't it? Apparently all the tracks and vehicles are playable in two-player, which is decent enough. Or internet. They're comparing it to F-Zero X and Wipeout 64, saying it's not quite up to the standard of F-Zero X, but they prefer it to Wipeout, which is interesting. There's a bit where they say player 1 is skilled, but player 2 drives like a one-armed chimp. Bit harsh maybe. Ika. Then there's a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are fantastic graphics, amazing podcraft, plenty of upgrades, and believable Star Wars worlds. Minuses are that it's not as smooth as the competition and might not last. Predictably, the shortest tracks are the best, they say. They also mention the podcraft looks the business, even if you wouldn't want to strap yourself into one. They give it ratings in visuals, sounds, mastery, and lifespan, all getting an 8 out of 10 except visuals, which gets a 9. Visuals are praised for being totally convincing Star Wars environments and superb craft. Sounds are just sampled audio, but apparently does the job. Mastery is about how the N64 has been used to great effect, despite a slightly sluggish frame rate. Lifespan is a bit short, but they reckon you'll keep coming back for more. Finally, the verdict is that the Star Wars name will sell millions, but thankfully it is actually worth the hype, and they slap an 88% on it. Oh, and there's a voucher for £5 off the game at UK branches of Gameplay, valid until the 12th of July 1999, so that's a blast from the past. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 30, well, it's a bit of a smackdown really for a game called Charlie Blast's Territory. The headline pretty much says it all. Falls well short of being the bomb. Apparently, they've never even mentioned it before and are already regretting it. Bit harsh, eh? It seems Charlie Blast is this fella who somehow ended up in a world made of bomb islands. The game is a puzzle thing where you push bombs around to blow stuff up, tile-based islands, one screen at a time kind of affair. They mention there are different types of bombs, TNT, and blue ball bombs, and the explosions are supposed to look like pizza bits, which isn't exactly high praise, is it? One of the big grumbles is about the password system. Instead of controller packs, you're stuck with this mad system of playing cards passwords. Sounds like a right pain to write down and enter, needing to mess about with suits and numbers and C buttons just to get back to where you were. They reckon it hurts your brains, which probably isn't far off the mark. Pika. The camera spins round when you finish a level, which they found pointless and annoying. There's also a red blob time bomb thing that they really didn't like. And if you leave Charlie alone too long, apparently he starts doing these All Saints-inspired dance moves, which sounds unintentionally hilarious. In the info burst box it says it's from Chemco, a 64 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, no controller or cartridge save, or Rumble Pack support, password save only, and it was out in the US already, June in the UK, and TBA in Japan. Cost £35, which back then was a decent chunk of pocket money. Overall, it sounds like Charlie Blast's Territory was a bit of a dud, not living up to the explosive name. They're not exactly thrilled, are they? Another one for the pile of not-so-great N64 games, I reckon. This page in N64 Magazine back in '99, well, it's having a right go at Charlie Blast's Territory. Remember that one? It was supposed to be a puzzle game where you push bombs about. A bit like Bomberman, but not as good, apparently. The reviewer is proper moaning about the time limits, saying puzzle games shouldn't be about rushing. They reckon Charlie Blast is obsessed with time, and it just makes it frustrating rather than fun. They even say waiting for platforms to move into place is a total bore. There's a bit where they talk about a bomb quartet mode, which sounds a bit like a Bomberman deathmatch, but they don't seem too impressed. Apparently, seeing what's going on in the distance is a pain. They also moan about accidentally making bombs stop working, which sounds like a right pain if you're halfway through a level. Looking at the pluses and minuses bit, they're struggling to find much to praise. Just about acceptable hires visuals is hardly glowing, is it? They do say later levels are challenging, but then they moan about the game being slow and the camera being rubbish. They reckon the password system is a pain too. Ouch. So see. Then there's a bit that says if you like this, and it suggests Lode Runner 3D, saying it's similar but much more enjoyable. That's probably a bit of a dig, isn't it? The verdict is pretty brutal. A game where you push bombs around, as repetitive and uninteresting as it sounds, and badly put together to boot. And they give it a 52% overall, which is, well, not great, is it? The individual scores aren't much better. Visuals are a 6, sounds a 5, mastery a 4, and lifespan a 5. Mastery of 4? Doesn't sound like there's much to master then. Masterer. So yeah, Charlie Blast's territory. Doesn't sound like we missed out on much if we skipped that one, does it? Probably best sticking to Bomberman if you fancied blowing things up back then. This page from N64 Magazine takes a look at Super Bowling, which is an import game from Japan. It's part of their Import Arena section. Doc. They've got a few screenshots of the game, showing it's a bowling game, naturally, with some fairly standard looking lanes, but they do mention the graphics are quite flashy with reflections and such, so it's not too bad looking for the N64. The pluses and minuses section is quite amusing. Pluses are likable characters, wide variety of lanes, splendid hires visuals, intuitive controls, and physics that feel right. Minuses are the game can be too easy, oversensitive controls sometimes, computer opponents cheat occasionally, and it gets boring before too long. Sounds about right for a bowling game, doesn't it? How much can you really do with bowling on a console back then? Worry. They mention the game is from Athena, a 64 megabit cart, for 1 to 4 players, and uses 17 pages on the controller pack for saves. Important stuff back then. It's out now in Japan, but TBA for the US and UK, so typical import situation. It's costing 6,800 yen, which they reckon is about 35 quid. Ouch, imports were pricey. Pay. The reviewer reckons it's a decent bowling game, and they were pleasantly surprised. They compare it to Milo's Astro Lanes, which doesn't sound like a compliment. They mention the characters include a breakdancing penguin and a tiny woodland fairy, which is certainly different. Visuals get an 8, sounds an 8, mastery a 7, lifespan a 6, and overall a 72% verdict. Not bad for a bowling game, I suppose. Taras. If you like it, they suggest Susume, Tyson Puzzle Drama, by Konami, another import, apparently a Puyo Puyo clone with a bowling subgame. Sounds typically Japanese, doesn't it? Always with the puzzle games and mini-games. Accessibility is good, apparently some Japanese text, but most of the important stuff is in English, which is helpful for us Brits trying to play imports. All in all, it seems like a decent enough bowling game if you're really desperate for one on your N64 and willing to pay import prices. But I think I'd rather spend my money on something like Zelda or Mario, to be honest. This page in N64 Magazine, it's having a look at an import game called Bottom of the Ninth for the N64. It seems to be a baseball game, but not a brilliant one by the sounds of it. They're comparing it to All-Star Baseball 2000, which they reckon is much better. Apparently Bottom of the Ninth is proper hard, dull as dishwater, and the graphics are a bit fuzzy. They do say it's got scenario mode and smooth animation going for it, but the negatives really outweigh the good stuff. They've given it a measly 44%, and the reviewer, Tim Weaver, pretty much says it's rubbish compared to All-Star Baseball 2000. There's a bit where they're talking about the AI being a bit dodgy, making these amazing pitches every time, and it being impossible to win. Sounds like a right pain to play. They mention other game titles with daft names like Countdown to Impact, No Surrender and Playing with Fire, and reckon these scenario modes are a bit like something you'd see in a Jean-Claude Van Damme film, but not in a good way maybe. It seems like they think Bottom of the Ninth is a bit pants compared to Konami's ISS footy games, which were usually pretty decent at the time. Looks like if you wanted a good baseball game back then, All-Star Baseball 2000 was the way to go, and Bottom of the Ninth was best left on the shelf. This page from the magazine has a big feature on Duke Nukem 0 Hour, Part 2 of a guide, apparently covering every level and multiplayer tips too. There's a section on budget games, for the cheaper N64 titles, calling them classics, which is maybe a bit generous. GoldenEye 007 is mentioned, suggesting new scenarios to keep it interesting if you were bored of Bond as if anyone was bored of GoldenEye. Missouri. Then you've got the regular Club 64 stuff, a mailbox for questions and letters, a tips extra section for handy hints, the Nintendo hotline, where they say, the boys in the know will answer your questions a bit much that. There's Game On with tricky challenges, compo results to see who won whatever competition and got the tat. Their words, not mine. I'm the best to prove your gaming skills, a contact section for a gaming car boot sale, and a directory claiming to have every game ever, reviewed here again, magazine talk. And then back issues and subscriptions, the usual thing. July 99 this was, takes you back a bit. This page of Club 64, the mailbox section, is full of readers having their say as usual. Kicking off with the star letter, Peter from Rotherham's been playing F1 World Grand Prix, good old F1 WGP, and found a bit of a glitch where his car gets all floaty after a crash. Sounds a bit odd, but those early 3D games could be glitchy buggers sometimes. Then Matt from Skegness is on about F0X, specifically the 0X track. Reckons he's found a proper dangerous bit on it. Richard from Wirral's also banging on about F0X tracks and the Crash Mandu competition, showing off a screenshot of a particularly nasty bend and claiming a super fast lap time of only 9 seconds. Blimey. These F0X tracks were pretty mental, weren't they? Blindingly fast. There's a correction corner bit where they're owning up to a mistake about Kirby games on the Game Boy and SNES. They got called out for saying Kirby was only on 2 SNES games and 1 Game Boy 1, when apparently there were more SNES Kirby games and a NES one too. Oops. Someone else is pointing out a date mix-up for issue 29, and another reader is questioning the word limit, and someone else is picking up on a Shadowgate release region error. Always someone ready to keep them on their toes, eh? Alex from Staines writes in about the Crash Mandu competition as well, and a bitchiest corner on F0X, saying he couldn't manage it and reckons loads of other people probably came off there too. Finally, Sweeling Cow from Hillingdon is having a laugh, or maybe not so much, because they got called son in issue 28's mutant competition results. Turns out Sweeling is a girl and not too happy about being mistaken for a lad. Ed's apologized and said it was a joke, saying, "You're obviously a girl." Bit cheeky that, Ed. This page from Club 64, right, it's the letters section and some game ideas blurb. Kicking off with a bit of a moan actually. Some bloke's got his knickers in a twist because they called him chap. Then there's another reader, seems like a bit of a character, writing in from Australia about some weirdo bothering him while he was playing Surface 1 on his, probably Commodore 64. Ed, the magazine guy, has a bit of a laugh about it. Meisu. There's a funny one about some fella in Ockerman who reckons he found the real-life Gerudo Fortress from Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Yeah, I can see that. That game was massive back then, wasn't it? Ed agrees it's a good likeness. Warringtoner. Someone else is having a pop at Nintendo saying they're too polite with their advertising, especially compared to Sony's PlayStation ads, which were always a bit moody. They reckon the N64 is loads better, twice as powerful and all that, and they've got the expansion pack, and Rare, and even Miyamoto. They make a point that Nintendo needs to shout about it a bit more, otherwise casual gamers will just go for the PlayStation 2 when it comes out. Fair point that. There's even a little advert tucked in there for Star Wars. Shadows of the Empire game, play dirty, for the N64. Down at the bottom there's a section called Dream On, where readers are pitching their game ideas. First up is Premier Pop Manager 64, like a football manager game but for pop groups. You're managing a pop band, sacking members, getting gigs, dealing with record labels, maybe even a run-in with Phil Collins apparently. Sounds a bit daft but could be a laugh. Then there's Neighbors, Madge Goes Mental. Now this sounds properly bonkers. It's like Zelda meets Resident Evil, with a Neighbors theme. Imagine that. Set in Ramsey Street with zombies, and you're playing as Harold Bishop or Lou Carpenter, taking down Madge, who's been bitten by a zombie. They're suggesting weapons like koala bear bombs and explosive Foster's lager cans, typical British humour. Secret characters could be Jim Robinson, Joe Mangle, and Scott and Charlene. They even want a dandruff weapon. Proper mental. Ed thinks it's a corker of an idea, reckons the skin bombs would be perfect for Rare to develop. Yeah, it's all a bit of fun. Typical reader mail page from back in the day. This page of Mailbox Club in N64 Magazine, it's all letters from readers, bless 'em. Right at the top, someone's asking if a Pentium 3 PC with an ATI Expert 98 will run something, probably a PC game. Not sure why they're asking N64 Magazine this, bit daft. Ed, the editor, is clearly knackered, replies, yawn. Sorry, what was the question? Bit cheeky that. Oh. There's some chatter about Andrea Ball from Disney Club, remember her? Someone thinks Jess looks like an idiot with his beard. Bit harsh, mate. And someone's moaning about blood in games. Oh, and Neil Moore wants a 5,050 profit split with Ed. For what, we're not told. Ed's having none of it, wants 7,525. Greedy sod. Moving on to So Tell Me This, it's more reader questions answered by Ed. First up, someone's asking about F1 World Grand Prix 2 and V-Rally 2 on the N64. Ed says F1 WGP 2 won't be drastically different, tracks are refined and drivers updated, standard stuff. V-Rally 2 on N64, not for a while, PlayStation version first, N64 one early next year, typical. Warring 2, Jungle Emperor Leo is mentioned, anyone remember that? Ed says no news on that one. And someone's still asking about Mother 3, Earthbound 64 as it was known back then. Still in development, no release date. Perennial vaporware that one was. Warrington. Superman 64 gets a mention, or the lack of mentions. Ed says they keep meaning to review it, but problems need ironing out, so probably another stinker then. Then there's questions about Battle Tanks 2, oh yes, Global Assault. Should be out soon in the UK after the US release. Vigilante 8 Second Offense is coming too sometime this summer. Good times, including Duke Nukem Forever, and Daikatana get a kicking as well. Duke Nukem Forever, Ed reckons maybe 2000 or 2001 if we ever see it, and Daikatana, Orrington to Norcus, same story really, well into 2000. They were always promising those games, weren't they? Always delayed. Finally, someone's asking about a new feature on ISS 99 International Superstar Soccer 99. For the uninitiated, but Konami aren't releasing J-League Perfect Striker 2 over here, so no feature. Apparently Major A are redoing ISS for 2000. Fair enough. Yiki. And that's your lot, letters page done. Address at the bottom for sending in your own ramblings if you fancy it. N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath. Right then. This page from N64 Magazine takes me right back to being a young lad, eagerly awaiting the next issue. It's the mailbag section, Club 64 mailbox, and it's called Perfect Day. Cheeky. It looks like readers have been sending in their ideas for Perfect Dark, which was a massive deal back then. Everyone was hyped for Rare's next big thing after GoldenEye. First up, Sam from Bournemouth wants auto-aim in Perfect Dark, letting you target 2 enemies at once. He reckons flickering lights in corridors would make alien attacks scarier. Which, yeah, sounds pretty tense. Then Jack from Macclesfield is suggesting picking up discarded weapons and reloading animations like in Half-Life. Manual reloading too, to make gunfights more dangerous. Bit hardcore for a console shooter maybe, but fair play. Warrington. Andrew from Newcastle has some camera ideas for when you use a telescopic sight, wanting it to zoom into the lens of the rifle rather than the whole screen, like GoldenEye did, and adjustable magnification like Duke Nukem, 0 Hour. He also suggests a create-a character mode for multiplayer, like WWF Warzone, which was pretty ambitious for the N64 at the time. Callum from Edinburgh suggests random item placement and that if you become really proficient at the game it should still be a new challenge every time you play, and wants the ability to plant mines on people, which sounds like a right laugh. Sandra from Manchester wants individual limb damage, so if you shoot someone in the leg it comes off in a torrent of blood, veins and muscles. One for the mums, that edit says, ha! Alternative endings and routes through the game too for replayability. Jeff from Cambridge wants to creep up behind guards and break their necks, and suggests a cloaking gun that creates an invisible wall of body-melting film. Crikey! Sounds a bit gruesome for a Nintendo game, but interesting ideas. Crikey! Alongside the letters, there's a load of reader artwork. There's a drawing of young Link, and another of characters from South Park, labeled as more familiar Nintendo characters, which is a bit cheeky considering South Park's not exactly Nintendo style. Someone's drawn a bunch of N64 World characters. Yoshi, Link, Toad, Sex for some reason, Bomberman, Mario, Duke Nukem and Stan from South Park again. Bit of a random bunch. Then there's Snowboard Kids 2 artwork, and some drawing of a saucy lady from Treadworth. And Brendan from Ballymena is apparently desperate to get his drawing of some Zelda characters, and an N64 logo printed, so they did. Good on them for showcasing the readers' stuff. It's all a bit mad, but that's what these magazines were like back then, full of passion and ideas. Good times. This page is from the old N64 magazine, back in the day, issue 30 it says up there. It's the Right You Are section, which was always a good bit, seeing what other folks thought of games. It's basically reader reviews, where they let normal gamers have their say, not just the journos. Jerkis. They've got 4 games reviewed here. First up is Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as our American cousins would call it. This bloke, Craig from Alresford, only gave it 50%. Says it's graphically terrible, not enough enemies, and his teammates are useless. He even says he killed them. Bit harsh, Craig. Mind you, Lilac Wars was decent enough at the time, but looking back, maybe it hasn't aged brilliantly. Next is Mario 64. Blimey. Spencer from Slough absolutely hates it. Gave it a big fat 0%. Says it's so boring it makes him sleepy, just collecting stars and doing mindless levels. He seems proper wound up about it. Says everyone raved about it but he thinks it's dated. 0% though, that's a stinker, isn't it? Bit extreme maybe. Then there's South Park. Neil from Kent gave that 55%. Says the graphics are nice and cartoon-like, but the gameplay is disappointing. He talks about throwing snowballs at turkeys and unimaginary landscapes. Sounds a bit dull to be fair. He also mentions multiplayer with Kenny dying, which is classic South Park alright. Warrington J. Lastly, we've got Rogue Squadron. And Ben from Norfolk is loving it. Gave it a massive 98%. Thinks it beats Zelda as best game ever, which is fighting talk. He says the graphics are splendid, gameplay fast and furious, and the sound creates a great atmosphere. Compares it to Turok 2, Body Harvest and GoldenEye, saying it beats them all. Bigging it up quite a bit, Ben. He's well excited for Star Wars Episode 1, Racer 2. Everyone was back then, weren't they? Warrington all. So yeah, a mixed bag of reviews. They're asking people to send in their own reviews, 100 words or so, with a percentage score, and send them to their address in Bath. They even want a photo of you to put with your review, saying you'll be famous all over the world. Those were the days, eh? This page from N64 Magazine features a how-to guide for Duke Nukem. 0 Hour. It's part 2 it says, so they must have covered the first part last month. Blimey, 2 months of Duke Nukem. It's subtitled, Dim the Lights, Put on some mellow music, and prepare to kick some butt. Sounds about right for Duke. It's written by Daniel Glenfield, and he's talking about the last 8 levels of the game. Seems like last month they covered the first 10 levels. He mentions Duke Match, the multiplayer, calling it a free-for-all multiplayer extravaganza. Which sounds a bit much, but I guess back then it was pretty impressive. He says there's more settings than you could shake a bloodied stick at. Bit graphic, Dan. There's a little box called What We Said, which is from a previous review in issue 28, and they gave it a 90%. The quote is, not quite varied enough, but 0 Hour is still a brilliantly executed blasting trip. 90% is pretty good going, wasn't it? Though, not quite varied enough and brilliantly executed in the same sentence. Bit of a mixed message there. Still, 90% back then was a definite must-buy in our book. There's a picture of Duke Nukem himself pointing his gun right at you, looking as cocky as ever, and a couple of screenshots showing some gameplay. Looks like standard Duke fare, shooting aliens in corridors and whatnot. Alien Head is the location in the screenshot, apparently. Yep, sounds like Duke Nukem. 0 Hour alright. This page is from an old issue of N64 Magazine. It's a guide for Duke Nukem. 0 Hour. Right in the middle of the mag. Classic. Level 11. The Whitechapel Killings is up first. Looks like Duke's wading through zombies and pigs in some London backstreets. Proper grim in it. The guide's telling you to deal with the enemies, grab ammo, find bombs, and use a water valve in the sewers. Typical Duke stuff. Loads of shooting and blowing things up, you know how it is. Then it's on to level 12. Plug M and Plant M. Even the level names are a bit daft, aren't they? This one looks like it's in some sort of crypt with gargoyles and coffins. Seems like you need to find a key, fight more zombies, and then get on a boat in the sewers. Yeah, pretty standard fare for Duke. Run and gun, bit of puzzle solving thrown in, all very tongue-in-cheek. 0 Hour was alright back then, not the best Duke game ever, but good for a laugh with your mates, especially on the N64. This page here is showing walkthroughs for GoldenEye 007. Right then, level 13 is Hydrogen Bomb. Looks like you start in a long corridor, and you need to find a key for one of the doors. Standard stuff for GoldenEye really, searching for ammo and fighting guards. Then it's down some stairs, into what they call a nest, shooting alien eggs. Those alien bits were a bit weird, weren't they? And grabbing the skeleton key. Use that key and you're on to the end of the level, Warrington Nest. Then on to level 14, going down. This one involves a ship it seems. You climb a ladder for shotgun shells, go into the ship, strafe around corners, which is always a good tip in GoldenEye, and avoid cabins because apparently there's not much ammo there, which is a bit daft really. Then it's an elevator down to the lower deck and more aliens. You need to find some bombs, blow up the engine room wall and find atomic health. Always welcome that was. Then you flood the ship and swim to the exit. Sounds like a bit of a watery escape to finish off. They also mention a Gatling gun somewhere in level 13, which was always a fun weapon to find. All in all, standard GoldenEye level guide fare. Nothing too groundbreaking, but useful if you were stuck back in the day. This page then is a bit of a walkthrough for Duke Nukem 0 Hour. Seems to be giving us the lowdown on levels 15, 16 and 17. Level 15, the rack, sounds like you're starting underwater, dodging gunfire and then having to find a courtyard key. Apparently you'll need night vision goggles for a bit, which, let's be honest, were always a bit naff in games back then, weren't they? You then get to use a catapult to smash a hole and grab the alien head key. Sounds typically Duke. Level 16, Brainstorm, is all about generators and shield walls. Seems like they're trying to make it a bit puzzly, having to pull levers and deal with collapsing ceilings. Spiders coming back is mentioned, naturally, always something nasty lurking around the corner in these games. The reviewer reckons this generator is the hardest to shut down, so thanks for the heads up. Finally, level 17, the Brothers Nukem. They say it's simplicity itself, which usually means it's anything but. Sounds like it's mostly about exploring and stocking up on weapons before the next bit. There's a car showroom involved, which sounds a bit random, but hey, it's Duke Nukem. Blow up some glass and you're in, apparently to find the level exit. Right then. Always good to get a few pointers if you were stuck, wasn't it? This page is all about getting through level 18 of Turok 2, Seeds of Evil, the Alien Mother. Looks like a proper guide, showing you how to grab the bio-emitter and navigate through the level, taking out those annoying lizard blokes and octobrains to get to the final boss. Remember getting stuck on this bit for ages back in the day. Then there's a how-to section, giving you tips on how to actually beat the Alien Mother boss. Standard stuff really, strafe left and right, watch out for the poison breath, and when she goes airborne, get out of the way, or you'll be squashed. Apparently the best way is to stick close, which sounds a bit risky, but they reckon it works. Using the rooftops? Jumping around? Yeah, that sounds like a typical Turok boss fight. Finally, they've got some Duke match tips for Duke Nukem 64. Cool as Ice Arena, they mention it's slippy as you like, so you're sliding all over the place. Good advice to just spray bullets everywhere with a rapid fire weapon when you're sliding about. Mindfunk Arena is apparently massive, you can get lost, and your radar is your best mate. They talk about warps that can get you to different parts of the map if you're low on health, always handy to know. Yeah, pretty standard Duke match tactics from the time. This page of the magazine is all about getting better at Duke Nukem 0-hour multiplayer. It's got tips for loads of the different levels, so first up is Atomic, saying it's a small level but with powerful weapons, so expect a proper fragfest. Teleporters are a good way to escape if you're being chased, and they reckon strafing in the corridors is key. Then there's Chimera, a dark underground level where the weapons regenerate after a bit, but it's small so you can get caught out quickly. If you grab 2 SMGs you're sorted. Strafing is good here too apparently. Warrington Neura. Sewery thing is next. Loads of pools and waterfalls and underground pipes, good for hiding. Loads of weapons dotted about the different levels, so keep your eyes peeled for players shooting from above. Using the teleporters to get around is a good shout too. Chushra. Red sector is split into 2 bits, one with the gamma cannon and the other with the sniper rifle. You can walk between them, but watch out for ambushes. If someone is chasing you in circles, like a right Mario Kart 64 nutter, they suggest running to the middle and trapping them behind the walls. Sounds a bit cheeky, doesn't it? Derriere. For Rocky Knoll, it's all about the walkway over the water, apparently that's where you're most vulnerable. There's a spot above the walkway where you can snipe people. If they dive into the water, predict where they'll come up and chuck some dynamite. Nice! B-Bull, Castlemania. Avoid the courtyard, it's a death trap. Best spot is the sentry box to get a good view of everyone. And drop down below ground for some armor. Sensible advice. Sliders no ice here, despite the name. Lots of small rooms and corridors. Trip switches change the level layout. You can shoot through walls, and rocket launchers are good here. If someone chases you through a teleporter, just turn around and blast them as they come out. Simple but effective. Epilepsy isn't one of the best levels, but good for a change of scenery. Lots of exits and a health top-up in the pool of water. Big crystals can be used for cover, or as traps. Get near a crystal, wait for someone to come close, and then jump out and give them what for. High Noon is a massive level, like a dry town level from the single-player game. Radar is useless, as it's so big. Head to the island surrounded by water for T and armor, and you can snipe people from the nearby ladder. Kesiwala. Last one is Hive 8, just small rooms and narrow passages. Grab the grenade launcher and get to the top of one of the passages for easy wins. Watch out for ambushes. May Gags. So yeah, loads of tips there for Duke Nukem 64. Might have to dust off the old N64 and give it a go again sometime. It was alright for a laugh back in the day, wasn't it? This page from N64 Magazine, right? It's all about how to clobber 5 N64 classics. Seems like they're giving us the lowdown on some players' choice games, you know, the budget range. They reckon you should be aware by now that there's a few decent cheap N64 games in the shops, and they are listing 5 of them. F1 World Grand Prix, Mario Kart 64, Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as the Yanks call it, Wave Race 64, and Snowboard Kids. Cracking games, most of them. They're promising tips and tricks for each. A bit of a refresher, they say. Warrinchaw. The main focus seems to be F1 World Grand Prix. They've got sections on unlocking the Hawaii bonus track, getting gold and silver drivers, some F-Zero X mode thing, and even unlimited fuel. Bit of a cheat fest, eh? For the Hawaii track, you've got to go to exhibition mode, change Williams to vacation, and boom, the track is open. Gold driver? Exhibition mode again, Williams to pyrite. Silver driver? You guessed it, exhibition mode, Williams to chrome. Seems like a bit of a theme there with the Williams team. For the F-Zero X mode, they're suggesting you pick a gold or silver driver, rookie level, manual transmission, and keep it in first gear to hit 800 miles per hour. Absolute madness, they say. Bit over the top, lads. And for unlimited fuel, Grand Prix mode, paddock screen, set fuel as low as possible. Apparently you'll get infinite fuel then. Never knew that. They've even got a What We Said box with an old review quote. Truly mind-blowing. No fluffed opportunity. The N64 has finally got the driving game that it really deserves. Bit strong, but it was good for its time. And the verdict is that until the sequel arrives, F1 WGP is still the top Nintendo driving game, giving it a 93%. Not bad going, I suppose. Looks like they were pretty keen on it back then. This page of the mag is looking at some top N64 games, classic stuff from back in the day. First up, it's Mario Kart 64, and they're running through some little tips and tricks. Things like getting a turbo start by pressing A between the second and third lights, which everyone knew about really, didn't they? They're also talking about power sliding around corners for a mini boost, recovering from banana peels, and getting a quick restart if you've been in the river on Royal Raceway. They even mentioned ghost races, and how to unlock them by beating certain times on Mario Raceway, Luigi Raceway and Royal Raceway, something for the real tryhards back then. They gave it a massive 91%, calling it the best multiplayer game ever, which, yeah, fair enough, we did spend hours on that with 4 controllers. Then it moves on to Snowboard Kids, trying to bill it as Mario Kart on ice, which is a bit of a stretch really, but you could see what they were getting at. They're showing off the unlockable courses like Silver Mountain, Quicksand Valley, and Ninja Land, telling you how to get them by winning gold cups. And of course, they had to put in a cheat code to unlock everything. All the snowboards, characters and courses, a proper button mashing sequence that Nancy apparently laughs at if you get it right. Sneaky way to get everything unlocked if you were lazy, weren't we all a bit? They gave Snowboard Kids a respectable 86%, saying the sequel is better, but the original is still a charming and playable experience. So yeah, couple of good N64 titles getting the how-to treatment. Pretty standard stuff for the mag really. This page in N64 Magazine takes me right back, doesn't it? We're looking at Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as the Yanks call it, and Wave Race 64, 2 absolute belters from the N64. Lilac Wars is up top, and they're talking about getting expert medals by keeping your hit count down, listing all the levels like Aquas, Area 6, Corneria, and right through to Zones. Good luck with that on Venom, eh? Apparently if you complete expert mode you get some hidden artwork, probably of Andross's ugly mug. There's also a bit about using the Landmaster tank in multiplayer, and playing on foot, which was a laugh with your mates, even if it was a bit clunky. They reckon Sector Z recharges you. Good to know if you were stuck on that level. They've given it a whopping 91%, calling it a landmark game, and the best shoot-em-up. Bit strong maybe, but it was good, I'll give them that. Calling it a level. Down below we've got Wave Race 64, proper summer vibes there. Quick start tip, color selection, and then a section on dolphin riding and doing stunts, like handstands, spins and rolls, off-ramps of course. Remember trying to pull those off with your mates? Good times. They've given Wave Race 64 a solid 90%, saying it was groundbreaking and essential for racing fans. Bit of hyperbole again, but it was a decent racer, especially back then when 3D water effects were still mind-blowing. Both games got top marks really, didn't they? N64 was smashing it at this point. This page, right, it's got a bit of everything going on. On the left there's a shout-out, Help He Wanted, typical sort of thing for these mags back in the day, looking for readers to write in with their game tips and guides. They were offering excellent rewards, and an exclusive N64 record bag if you got printed, designed by some bloke called Will Overton. Classic. They even give you the rules, about 600 words, focus on one specific bit of a game, not the whole thing, and don't stress about pictures. Then the main event is this how-to guide, all about Zelda, Ocarina of Time I'd guess from the look of it. It's titled, Find 11 Cool Things in the Legend of Zelda, by Oliver Bolton. It kicks off with the premise, you've finished Zelda but you still want to potter around Hyrule without the stress of saving Princess Zelda all the time. He's picked out some quirky things to do once you've wrapped up the main quest. The first tip is infinite health. It's a bit of a glitchy exploit using a bug in a bottle near a drop-off point. You release the bug, catch it again, equip an empty bottle, jump, and then do some button presses. Apparently, Link then pretends to drink from an empty bottle and gets health back. Sounds a bit fiddly, but back then we were all about these little tricks to get one up on the game. There's screenshots showing Link and the health hearts at the top, and some text boxes in the game explaining about the bug in the bottle. Always good to get a bit more out of your games, wasn't it? This page of Club 64 Help Wanted is all about getting a leg up in Ocarina of Time, that massive adventure we were all glued to back in '99. Right then, let's have a look. First up, musical weapons. Bit of a daft one really, but it says you can play weapons like musical instruments. Didgeridoo with a Deku stick, eh? Sounds a bit silly, but back then we'd try anything, wouldn't we? Right. Then there's Strobe Link, which is just about making Link flash when he runs by tapping the Z button. Probably more annoying than useful, to be honest. Laser pointer. Now this one is a bit clever. Using the hookshot as a laser pointer by holding Z and using the shield button. Might have been handy for showing your mates where to go, or just messing about. Change Ocarina Notes tells you how to sharpen or flatten notes on the ocarina by pressing Z or R and using the joystick to bend the notes. For all those budding musicians out there, I suppose, probably more likely to just annoy your family with off-key tunes. Save magic with the Lens of Truth. This is a proper tip. Instead of just pressing a C button to keep the Lens of Truth on, tap it instead. Apparently saves on magic, which is always welcome, especially in those dark dungeons. Secret Grotto in Ganon's Castle. Use the Lens of Truth in Ganon's Castle to find a secret grotto, fairies and business scrubs. Classic Zelda stuff. Always good for a bit of extra help or cheeky deals. Yuck. Freeze Navi. Oh, Navi. Well, if you were tired of her constant nagging, apparently you could freeze her in the Temple of Time by standing in a specific spot after reading the inscription and playing Saria's song. Peace at last, eh? Though she'd just start up again as soon as you moved, wouldn't she? Change color of one-eyed statues. Plant a bomb near those stone statues. And apparently, you can change their color by hitting them with your sword at the right moment during the countdown. A bit pointless, but hey, we all messed about with bombs back then. Magic music is just a note that after you finish the game you can play the songs you taught Pierre the Scarecrow on different instruments. A nice little touch for completionists, I suppose. Finally, play Ocarina whilst doing something else. This one's a bit fiddly, using the pause screen to select a song, then pressing start to unpause, and apparently, the Ocarina will keep playing. Sounds like a bit of a faff, but might be useful for background music if you were really bored. So yeah, that's the Help Wanted page for this month. A few nuggets in there, some a bit daft, but all about getting the most out of Ocarina of Time, which is fair enough. We were all obsessed with it at the time. This page delves into ways to keep GoldenEye 007 on the N64 feeling fresh, even though it had been out for a good while by '99 and was a lunchtime favorite at the office. They're suggesting if you're finding it a bit too easy, even on 00 Agent, then it's time to crank up the challenge. First up, they talk about the License to Kill setting, which is all about making the game more realistic by tweaking the level editor. They recommend settings like enemy health at 0%, enemy damage at 1000%, and enemy reactions at 100%. The idea is to make it so you die super quick, but so do the bad guys, if you can hit them that is, and no cheats are allowed. They reckon this is best for levels like Dam and Facility. Then there's a silly one called Hat's a New Way to Play GoldenEye. This is purely for laughs with mates. Turn on invisibility and infinite ammo cheats, and then the aim is to shoot the hats off guards without killing them. The person with the most hat shots wins. Bit daft, but could be a laugh after a few beers. There's a section called What We Said, where they remind you they reviewed GoldenEye in issues 7 and 9, giving it a massive 94%. They quote themselves as saying it's sheer, unadulterated Bond brilliance. They were clearly chuffed with it back then, and rightly so. It was a proper game changer. Finally, they give specific level tips. For Dam, they suggest long-range rocket fire at the start, and warn the tunnel section at the end is the real challenge. Cheats allowed are all weapons and infinite ammo, and surprisingly, enemy rockets are also on. For Facility, they reckon it's possibly the best level for hard challenges. They suggest using hand grenades and waiting for the smoke to clear before moving forward in the tunnel. A top tip for the SLAP and KF-7 Soviet weapons is to use the KF-7 for unwanted attention, and the SLAP to take enemies out quietly. Hold R to bring up the aiming sight and tap Z to fire one shot at a time, ideal for the start of the level. So some solid advice there if you were still stuck in '99. This page from Club 64 is all about getting you through the tougher bits of GoldenEye 007. Blimey, GoldenEye, what a game that was back then. They've got tips for different levels like Bunker 1, Train, Bunker 2, Frigate, Gate, and Silo. For Bunker 1, they reckon using the taser and going for headshots, which is always good advice. Cheats include 2x lasers and all weapons. And the 007 objective is enemy reactions at 100%. Sounds like a proper challenge. They suggest 2x lasers as weapons, obviously. The train level, they say it's a bit tough, especially the first few carriages, and those special forces blokes at the front. Cheats for that one are gold PP7, and all weapons with infinite ammo and enemy rockets chaos. Weapons of choice are just the gold PP7. Bunker 2 is all about headshots again, this time with the club. Yeah, good luck with that pea shooter. Cheats are all weapons and infinite ammo, and the 007 setting is enemy health at 250% and enemy reactions at 100%. Clob is the weapon, haha, they even put that in brackets. Then there's Frigate, where they say in-depth ship knowledge is key, which is fair enough. Cheats are infinite ammo, fast animation and enemy rockets, with 007 being enemy health at 0%, damage at 1000%, and reactions at 100%. Talk about glass cannons. They suggest the Silence D5K Deutsche weapon. Gate is about accuracy, and not missing shots with the golden gun, otherwise it's curtains. Cheats are golden gun and all weapons. 007 is enemy reactions at 100%, and they suggest the golden gun but not the gold PI7, which is a bit specific. Finally, Silo is called a difficult one because of the army of soldiers and the time limits, though they reckon the time limit isn't too bad. No cheats are listed for Silo. There's also a bit at the bottom called Your Turn, asking if you've completed all the challenges, and to send in your own missions and tips to N64 Magazine at their address in Bath. Crikey, posting letters to magazines, those were the days. This page is all about cheat codes and passwords for a couple of games. At the top, there's Charlie Blast's Territory, which, blimey, who remembers that one? It's got a load of level passwords listed out. Looks like if you were stuck, you could just punch in these card combinations to skip ahead. Very handy back then, before everyone just looked everything up online, eh? Then underneath that is Micro Machines 64 Turbo. Now that's more like it. Micro Machines was always a laugh, especially on the N64. This bit's got loads of cheat codes for it. Things like bounce high, 2x speed, slow CPU cars, and even a debug menu fancy. They also mention how to blow up all cars in the race, which sounds like a right giggle. Get a turbo boost at the start, and even how to jump at the finish line for a turbo jump. And get this, you can even change your car into random objects in challenge mode, typical Micro Machines daftness. In it, always good for a laugh with your mates, even if it did get a bit chaotic. Good times, eh? This page is all about having a bit of cheeky fun with your games, isn't it? They're calling it RA. It's not really cheating, is it? Which is a laugh. Seems to be aimed at those who like to bend the rules a bit, saying it's all good as long as you're having fun. Fair enough, I suppose. First up, we have Triple Play 2000. Remember that one? Baseball game. They've got a bunch of cheats for it. Looks like you can add runs to either team, smack easy home runs, always satisfying that, and even mess about with the sound effects after a homer. Then there are some proper cheat moves for instant outs, and messing with the ball count. Good for winding up your mates, I reckon. Then there's California Speed, a bit of a racer, wasn't it? They're talking about bonus cars. You can unlock things like a 5.0 car, Mountain Dew pickup, and even a squirrel car. Sounds a bit bonkers, typical N64 stuff. You also get tips on unlocking tracks, like the Fiji track and Clover track, and something about a mirror series. Oh, and a shortcut in the Mount Shasta track, always handy to shave a few seconds off your lap times, isn't it? And finally, they've got a classic tip for Banjo-Kazooie. They call it the best game of '98, at least until Zelda showed up. Big claim. But yeah, Banjo was pretty good fun, wasn't it? They've listed a load of cheat codes to use after you've drained the sandcastle in Treasure Trove Cove. Codes for unlimited blue eggs, mumbo tokens, honeycombs, air, lives, red and gold feathers. Basically, everything you could want to make the game a right walk in the park. Banjo is a washing machine. W-I-S-H-Y. W-A-S-H-Y-B-A-N-J-O. What a silly code. But I bet we all typed it in back in the day, didn't we? Good times. This page is the Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. It's a bit of a laugh, like a problem page for gamers if you had a gaming problem. You've got old Doc Kitts himself looking rather serious, and surrounded by a bunch of Mario characters like Yoshi, Mario, Luigi, Toad, and even Donkey Kong and Wario. Galas. Someone's written in about Mario Party asking how to get the game balls. Remember those? You had to get loads of coins for those. Then there's a fella stuck on 1080 snowboarding, can't get the gold border. That snowboarding game was quite the thing back then. Another poor soul struggling with the rooftop escape level in Mission. Impossible on the N64. That game was a bit of a sneaky nightmare in places, wasn't it? And someone else can't finish Mario Raceway on Mario Kart 64 fast enough. Warrington Norsa, Dr. Kitts is giving his expert advice, telling the Mario Party bloke you need to get 300 coins to buy game balls. For 1080 he's talking about some complicated button combo to get the gold border character. For Mission Impossible he says there's a shortcut by jumping off some railings to avoid guards, cheeky shortcut that. And for Mario Kart 64, there's a shortcut on Mario Raceway, involving a mushroom, and hopping proper hard shortcut that was, if you could manage it. Looking at the screenshots there, yeah, Mario Kart 64, and Mission Impossible, proper classics on the N64. Good times, eh? Gaming problems were simpler then, weren't they? This page from N64 Magazine, issue 30, kicks off with a bit of chat about waiting for Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, which was a pretty big deal back then for N64 owners, although apparently, this Martin fella on the mag couldn't even wait and got to review it early. Anyway, they're saying if you are waiting, then you should play some top quality stuff on your N64 in the meantime, like Zelda, Ocarina of Time, because everyone was still hooked on that, weren't they? They've had a look at reader questions about Zelda, and picked some of the common ones to answer. So, first up, someone called Mr. and Mrs. Bodinar from Coventry is asking how to change back to being a kid in Zelda after becoming adult Link. The answer is pretty straightforward. You can't go back to being young Link until you've finished the Forest Temple and got the Forest Medallion, but after that you just pop the Master Sword back in the Temple of Time pedestal, and you're a nipper again, easy peasy. Tasty. Next, Bonnie Kuvistora from Denmark is struggling to find the last gold skull killer in the market in Hyrule Castle Town. The magazine guy says this is a common trick, and it's often something really subtle you're missing. He points out that the marketplace is part of the castle area, so if you've already got all the sculptures in the castle proper, you won't get another token on your map screen specifically for the market bit. So basically, check all around the castle areas really carefully for that last blighter. Then, Jordan Davison from England is stuck in the Forest Temple with some blocks puzzle, bless him. The answer talks about pushing a blue block, climbing on it, following gold arrows, pushing a red block, making noise, climbing again, going around a corner, up a ladder, and through a door. Sounds like classic Zelda block, pushing puzzle stuff. We've all been there. Apparently, after that, you're in a wonky room where you need to jump to the middle pillar, to reach a door on the right, use a key, fight some skeletons, and a big skeleton bloke to get the fairy bow from a chest, which you'll need for the twisted corridors bit. Sounds like a right faff, as usual with the Forest Temple. Finally, there's Joost Ruiz from Holland, who's stuck in Zora's Fountain trying to win the diving game for the silver scale. The tip here is to line yourself up with one of the waterfalls when you dive off the top, which should help you get through the rings. Simple as that, apparently. And yeah, there's a big picture of Skeletor on the side there, looking a bit menacing, just for a bit of visual flair, I suppose. Probably nothing to do with Zelda, just N64 Magazine being N64 Magazine. This page from the magazine, yeah, this is the hotline section, Club 64 it was called. Blimey, proper retro now, isn't it? This issue's got some tips for Zelda, Ocarina of Time, which was massive back then, still is to be fair. Someone's stuck in the water temple, and to be honest, who wasn't? The answer explains how to get the boss key, needing the longshot, remember the hookshot upgrade? And playing Zelda's Lullaby, classic stuff. Water temple, eh? They weren't kidding when they said it was hard, confusing as anything trying to find your way around that place. Then there's a question about when you're adult. Lincoln Sheik tells you to go to Kakariko village. Turns out it's about Dampé and learning a new skill in the graveyard, which leads to getting the hookshot. Ah, the hookshot, another essential bit of kit for Link. Nay, there's a bit explaining what the hotline is all about, staffed by expert games players, bless them, giving tips and cheats. Says they deal with thousands of calls a week. Pretty busy then. They've even got an automated service now, for those late-night gaming emergencies. Calls cost 50p a minute, ouch. Mind you, back then you were properly stuck if you couldn't figure something out yourself or ask your mates. No game FAQs on your phone in your pocket like now, eh? You actually had to phone someone. Mad in it. And remember to have a pen and paper ready. Like we didn't know that. Warrington, no. Yeah, simpler times maybe. But those games, especially Zelda, they were something else, weren't they? This page then, game on it says in big letters, taking me right back. Right then, 10 challenges to test the best apparently. Let's have a look. Torsu. First up it's GoldenEye, with something called Super Slapper. Right, so instead of all the guns, it's a slap fight. License to kill difficulty Golden Gun, but you can only slap people. 2 against 1, and you take your deaths off your kills to get a score. Sounds daft, doesn't it? But back then, GoldenEye multiplayer, we'd try anything, wouldn't we? Slaps only, why not? Now. Then there's Super Mario 64, Bob Beeman they've called it. Basically long jumps in Hoom's Fortress. you're supposed to jump on these platforms, and it mentions using the Lakitu camera, or the Mario camera angle, trying to make it harder by messing with the view. Typical. I remember spending hours just messing about in Mario 64 anyway, so this is just another way to waste an afternoon really. Next is Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Bug Catcher. This is a bit of a weird one. Something about dropping a bug and getting two, then catching them in bottles in the Temple of Time, and racing around the Master Sword to count laps. Sounds like they're really scraping the barrel for ideas now. But yeah, Ocarina of Time, we rinsed that game dry, didn't we? So any excuse to go back. Cool. Lastly, there's Rakuga Kids, called Now That's Magic. Konami beat 'em up. Didn't do too well apparently, but was alright. The challenge is to beat the computer, and the trick is to do quick air punches to build up your magic meter. Rakuga Kids, I vaguely remember that. There was so many games back then, some you just passed over. Still, looks like they found something to say about it. Warranty. So yeah, 10 challenges overall, across a few games to keep you going. Classic N64 Magazine stuff. Finding new ways to play the games we already loved, or maybe even find some love for the games we missed. Good times. This page in Club 64 Mag has got a right laugh on it. 10 challenges to test the best, they reckon. It's a bunch of mini challenges, set in different N64 games, you know, those ones we were all glued to back in the day. Or, first up is Top Gear Overdrive, remember that? They're calling the challenge Chicken, and it's all about exploiting the game's dodgy collision physics. Apparently you're meant to drive backwards around the sandy beach track and set off as many explosions as you can. Typical Top Gear really, always a bit of a banger. Then there's F1 World Grand Prix with Quick Fit. This one's about wrecking your Formula 1 car, proper satisfying stuff. The challenge is to lose all 4 wheels by smashing headfirst into a wall. Seemingly, us readers were already doing this for fun, so they made it a challenge. GoldenEye 007 gets a look in with Super Slapper Part 2. Of course it's about slapping, what else? This time, you're up against it with 3 slappers against 1 shooter in the facility level. They say you need a steady hand, and to be a sneaky slapper to succeed. Sounds like a right laugh with your mates. Pilotwings 64 is next, and they've called it Score Monster. This is about getting all gold medals in the game, which, let's be honest, was proper tough. They mention a score of 3,600 as the gold standard, saying they're currently on 3,528. Cheeky sods are putting the pressure on. Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as some people called it, has a dummy Starwolf challenge. You gotta blast through the training level, and take out 50 of those easy ships to trigger the Starwolf team fight. All within 3 minutes. Gotta be quick fingers for that one. You? Lastly, there's Rogue Squadron and AT-AT blasting. This sounds brutal. You have to take down AT-ATs on the Hoth bonus level, without using harpoons, just blasting them with lasers. Apparently you've got to deal with AT-STs as well. They even admit it's almost impossible, saying it's one of the hardest challenges they've ever set. Good luck with that then. So yeah, that's the page, a bunch of tough little challenges for some top N64 games, proper retro stuff. This page is a right blast from the past, isn't it? It's the results page for a Tats Entertai competition from issue 27 of N64 Magazine. Good issue, that one. Basically, readers sent in their old Nintendo tats in exchange for some better Nintendo stuff that the magazine had lying around. Looks like they got a load of stuff sent in, judging by the write-up, from moldy bits and bobs to bags of excellent stuff. They were giving away about $1,000 worth of Nintendo gear in total. Gulagi. Right then, let's see who won what. Chris Willoughby from Wellingborough got something for his Bubba Lou Bird puppet, which is a bit random, isn't it? David Gordon from Hartford got a Commodore 64C. That's proper retro, even back then. Daniel Morris got an old-style Game Boy, the Brick, in red, plus 2 games and a carry case. Not bad at all. There was someone who sent in a Nintendo Power Mario sweatshirt, and a Super Mario Land cassette single by Ambassadors of Funk, but they didn't leave their details, so they need to get in touch. Bit of a pain that. Carol Harrison from South Ockenden bagged herself a smashing tank top embroidered with the N64 Magazine logo, Mario, Luigi and other Ninty bits. Sounds a bit loud, but alright. Nick Henry from Gloucester is getting a Sega Master System and about 10 games. Seems a bit odd in an N64 mag to be honest, but fair play. Alex Cullen from Leeds got a radio-controlled Mario Kart. Ace! Down the bottom we've got Danal Ashmore from Reddish, who sent in some real a fake Han Solo figure in official Luke Skywalker packaging and got something for it. Brian Murray from Enniskillen got a programmable TV console, no idea what that is, sounds a bit rubbish. Luke Sampson from Fleet got 2 SNES controllers that open up into Street Fighter playsets, remember those? John McIlvaney of Washington won something for Brown's 70s styling of his Binatone TV games console. Simon Hiller from Margate got a cracking little Nintendo calculator. Kenneth Potter of Headworth got 2 Nintendo Watches, Zelda and Mario, Jamie McLeod from Killingsworth got a Donkey Kong Jr. Game & Watch tabletop game, and Alan Dale from Surrey is getting a probably quite valuable Nintendo Boxing Micro vs. System. Doc. All in all, looks like a decent haul of prizes for getting rid of your old tat. They've pictured some of the entries. We can see the blue Bubbaloo Bird puppet, a Commodore 64 box, the red Game Boy box, some Star Wars figures in boxes, a Game & Watch, some watches and the controllers that turn into Street Fighter bits. Good stuff. This page of the magazine is all about connecting with fellow N64 gamers. We've got sections for selling fanzines, swapping games, wanting games, and even finding pen pals. In the fanzine section, there's the usual shoutouts for back issues of magazines like Games Master, EGM, CVG and Official Nintendo, all the mags we used to pore over for cheats and tips, before the internet made it all too easy. Someone's even flogging cheat booklets for games like GoldenEye and Mission Impossible. Remember those? Good times trying to figure out those button combos from blurry screenshots. The games to swap and games wanted sections are pretty lively. Loads of folks trying to trade in their games. Looks like V-Rally 99 and Star Wars are doing the rounds for swaps, alongside Fighter's Destiny, FIFA 64, and plenty of Turok 2 and F-Zero X. GoldenEye seems to be the evergreen swap item. Everyone either wants it or is trying to trade it for something else. Then there's folks hunting down titles like FIFA 99, Micro Machines, all the Mario games. Final Fantasy seems like everyone was after the big hitters. Zelda 64, Abe's Exodus and Rogue Squadron also get a mention as games people are after. Is a real snapshot of what everyone was playing and wanted to play on their N64 at the time. Finally, the pen pal section. Bless them, kids looking for mates who are also into N64. Lots of lads and lasses after pen pals interested in the same games, music and telly. A proper pre-internet way to connect over your shared love of the console. Mention of liking The Simpsons and GoldenEye in a few of these. Typical N64 kids stuff back then. It's quite sweet really, a reminder of how different connecting with people was back before everyone was online. This page is a letter from America piece. Must be from after E3, back in '99. Looks like they were sent to the States to check out all the N64 stuff. It's headlined as an E3 special interrogation. Bit dramatic for a game show report, isn't it? There's a bit about the biggest game show on Earth and getting the lowdown on the latest, greatest N64 games. So they were certainly building it up. The page has a couple of pictures from the Star Wars Episode 1 bits at E3, showing off Racer and Darth Maul, looking menacing as you'd expect. They even put a little caption under Maul saying, "Scary man, yes? Bit obvious lads, but fair enough. He was quite the sight back then with that double lightsaber." Seems like Star Wars was a big deal at the show, no surprises there. Episode 1 mania was in full swing. This page is an interview with David Denspear, the creative director of Turok, Rage Wars. He's chatting about the new Turok game for the N64. Apparently they decided to make it because they had such a laugh playing Monkey Tag in Turok 2 multiplayer and figured a dedicated multiplayer game could work well on the old N64. They reckon Turok 2's multiplayer, while good, could be improved. Rage Wars is meant to be its own thing, not just more of the same, with completely new character models, weapons and environments. They're boasting about more detailed geometry and maps, aiming for loads of levels, between 36 and 40 apparently. They've also put in bots, so you can play deathmatch on your own, if you are a Billy No Mates. Apparently there's a single player mode, but it seems to be more about unlocking stuff for multiplayer. There are 18 characters to play as, though you have to unlock some of them. They're even thinking about a creator player mode, and maybe nicking Rare's GB pack idea. Cheeky. Weapon-wise, they've got 6 new ones, plus they've brought back the minigun from the first Turok. One new weapon he mentions is rocket magnets, which sounds a bit daft really, but might be a laugh. You can stick magnets to people or walls, and then rockets will home in on them, causing chaos. They've also got repulsors which can bounce rockets back. Sounds like typical over-the-top Turok stuff. Bore. There's a few little bits and bobs dotted about the page. There's a picture of Watto from Star Wars, with a sarcastic caption about him flapping his wings, and another of Jar Jar Binks, wondering if he'll be annoying in the new Star Wars film. They had their finger on the pulse there, didn't they? There's also a pic of Jet Force Gemini being shown on a massive screen, which is a nice nod to another Rare game coming out. And at the bottom someone's written that Turok 2 was great and Rage Wars should be even more violent and twice as fun. Standard hyperbole really, but we'll see. This page in N64 Magazine, we're having a look at a couple of upcoming titles. First up, it's Hybrid Heaven, which sounds a bit like something you'd read in a sci-fi comic, doesn't it? Apparently, Yasuo Daikai, the director, is banging on about the storyline being movie-like with lots of suspense and mysteries. He reckons it's taken 3 years to get the game together from scratch, and it's a new style RPG battle system in 3D. They've put a lot of thought into it. Sounds like they're trying to make it more than just a button masher. He even mentions Diaz and Slater, whoever they are, and hints one of them might be a fake. Intriguing, I suppose. He reckons it'll take at least 25 hours to finish if you take your time, maybe longer. And they've used the expansion pack to enhance the graphics, which is always good to hear. Looks alright in the screenshot, a bit beefcakey main bloke. Then over on the other side, we've got Rainbow Six. Mike Lomas from Red Storm is talking about this one. Sounds a bit more serious this, with talk of tactics and squad-based gameplay. Apparently their team is made up of 10 people. 3 artists, 3 programmers, 3 data wranglers, and a musician. Data wranglers, eh? Fancy name for something or other. They're saying the N64 version will have cooperative campaigns, unlike the PC version which is single player, which is a bit of alright. They're adding environmental effects and improved AI and grenade throwing, all that jazz, and it's supposed to look a bit like GoldenEye, which is a pretty high bar, mind you. They're trying to use the N64's built-in features, which you'd hope so, wouldn't you? There's a screenshot of the game, looks a bit grey and gritty, very serious soldier types, and it says here, "This is the deadly soldier that you'll be playing as." Well, let's hope he's deadly then, eh? Kakakakakak. Down at the bottom there's a couple of snaps from what looks like a show floor. Mario Fountain, Pikachu, very Nintendo, isn't it? The Nintendo stand was huge, it says. Bit over the top, but then again, that's Nintendo for you. This page is from an old N64 mag, blimey, brings back memories. Right then, let's have a butcher's. On the left, there's a bit about Perfect Dark with Duncan Botwood, one of the designers. He's chatting about how they always planned a sort of follow-up to GoldenEye, but wanted to do their own thing rather than just another Bond game. Fair play. Says Perfect Dark is a completely different story and uses a heavily modified GoldenEye engine, which makes sense. They were always pushing the boat out with GoldenEye, so makes sense they would tinker with it for the next game. Apparently multiplayer is going to be more flexible too. Good news that, Jackaj, Warrington Orchestra. Then over on the right we've got a report from E3. Back when E3 was a thing, our man Jess is apparently knackered from trekking halfway across the world. Sounds like it was a sweaty affair. E3 always was a bit of a scrum, wasn't it? Nintendo's stand was massive apparently. Loads of games mentioned there: Jet Force Gemini, Donkey Kong 64, Resident Evil 2, and Winback, all decent titles. Shadowman, Hybrid Heaven, Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, and World Grand Prix 2 are in there too. Command & Conquer, StarCraft, Quake 2, and Mario Golf are rattled off as well. Quite a list, wasn't it? Apparently, Eternal Darkness and Rainbow Six were also shown, which were interesting games coming to the console. The article mentions massive Donkey Kong models and banners for Pokemon, which was just going properly bonkers at this point. Life-size Pod Racer and Darth Maul models too, they were really going for it then. Sony didn't have much to show apparently, and Nintendo apparently made their Dolphin announcement just before E3. Cheeky. Playable PlayStation 2 was there, but rumor had it that it was all behind closed doors. Bit hush-hush. The reviewer seems pretty excited about the N64 still, saying there's plenty to look forward to for us N64 fans. Games look good then for the old grey box, even if PlayStation was looming. This page from N64 Magazine is looking forward to some big hitters. First up there's Quake 2, they're saying it's finally arrived on the N64 after being delayed a bunch, reckoning it's a decent PC conversion. Then there's Premier Manager 64, which they're calling the N64's first proper football management game, with Kevin Keegan's face slapped on it. Moving on, they've got a bit of a playtest for Jet Force Gemini from Rare. Sounds like it's going to be a bit of a laugh with whacking great guns and 8-legged beasts. Typical Rare madness really. Underneath that, there's Star Wars Episode 1. Racer looks like they're promising tips and tricks for mastering all the tracks in the mag. And at the bottom, a sneak peek at what's coming next month in their Game Boy section, Planet Game Boy, with mentions of Conker's Pocket Tales and Resident Evil 2 on the Game Boy Color. Blimey, Resi 2 on the Game Boy. That's going to be interesting. This page in N64 Magazine takes a look at Beatles Adventure Racing, which is a bit of a strange one. In it, seems like they wanted a big name for a driving game sequel and ended up with the Fab Four because they couldn't get Billy, whoever Billy is. Apparently she was at some love festival. According to the lead programmer Gideon Thickett, they wanted to do something different, and the Beatles catalogue was ripe for inspiration. Tracks are based on Beatles songs like Norwegian Wood and Back in the USSR. Imagine racing to that. They've even got you chasing John and Yoko through Leningrad, and somehow getting cars tied to rooftops. Apparently there's a yellow submachine mode which sounds as daft as it gets. The cars themselves sound a bit bonkers. One's called the Mustache Mobile, and another one is called Reliant, which probably handles like a three-wheeled Reliant Robin, knowing those things. On the right there's the index for issue 30, the usual stuff, previews and reviews of games, bits and bobs like 40 Winks Future Look, Donkey Kong 64, and Mario Golf Preview. Looks like it was on sale Tuesday the 15th of June, and the next one was due Monday the 12th of July. Christ, time flies.